Livia has never had an easy life. From the moment she was born, the girl got used to harsh realities and the fact that nothing comes easy. She grew up in an orphanage, not knowing who her parents were and not understanding why they made the decision to leave a defenseless child alone in a cruel world. Livia did not develop relationships with peers and other children because of her difficult character and temper. She had a hard time forgiving offenses and betrayals, did not socialize with those who were unpleasant to her, and became a more and more difficult child with each passing year. However, she was not always like this. Childhood cruelty Livia had to learn at the age of 5, when the older children disliked her because of her cute appearance and organized a boycott. No one spoke to her. Every night a blanket was taken away from little Livia so that she would curl up from the cold and would not look as ruddy and healthy as those who came to choose a child for their family said. In the canteen, the girl was poured salt and pepper into her plate so that she could not eat. And during exercise, she was constantly pushed so she would fall and look clumsy. The children's plan worked. In a couple of weeks, the once beautiful Livia changed beyond recognition. She became very thin and pale, often sick, screaming and snapping at the caregivers. She cried and hit other children not just for no reason, but because she decided to keep silent and not tell anyone about the horrors she had experienced. No one believed her. There were many bruises on her body. Her faded gaze repulsed potential parents. Year after year, the girl remained in the orphanage until all her abusers, because of whom she became like this, were not sorted into homes, giving them hope for a happy future. Already at the age of 10, Livia knew exactly what she wanted: to be self-sufficient, independent and self-sufficient. She had to be better than everyone else, to reach the top, to earn well and not need anything, so that her child would never be abandoned and unwanted. How exactly, she didn't understand yet, but she knew she had to. Time passed, and Livia turned from a battered duckling into a beautiful swan. Her beautiful, slender figure, expressive eyes and self-confidence attracted glances, making her an unforgettable girl. She was eagerly waiting for the last 3 years of confinement to pass, and she could break free. However, it didn't turn out to be that easy. One day, the head of the orphanage came into Livia's room and cheerfully said, "People are coming today who are ready to become your guardians until you come of age. They wanted to adopt you, but I talked them out of it so you wouldn't lose your privileges for your long stay with us. So get ready to meet them. They have to like you. There may not be another chance to get out of here and see a normal life." The woman was about to leave, but stopped and added sternly, "And save your temper for later. I don't think your constant fighting is going to help you find a family." She walked out, leaving Livia in silence. Unpleasant thoughts swarmed in the girl's mind. She wasn't planning on becoming part of anyone's family anymore, especially at such an advanced age. Why would she call someone mom and dad now if she no longer needed the care, warmth, and understanding she longed for as a child? Livia sat on the bed, eyes tightly closed, and thought about the kind of people who would become her so-called parents and how they would behave. What are they taking the girl in for, and what should she prepare herself for in thinking? Hours later, Livia only came to her senses when she was invited into the waiting room to meet the people who wanted to take custody of her. Reluctantly, she did go out, knowing that disobedience would be punished. A young couple sat in the room, eager to meet Livia. The man seemed completely disinterested, and the woman fidgeted nervously, waiting for the girl to come out. Livia stopped in the doorway, unsure of how to act. Children were rarely taken into custody at such an advanced age. As soon as she appeared, the stranger jumped up and rushed to hug her. Livia pulled back, making it clear she wasn't ready for such intimacy. But the woman hugged her tightly anyway and spoke loudly. "How exhausting you've been living here all this time so thin. You've been mistreated here. But with so many children, you can't keep track of them all. It's okay, you have a new family now, and we'll do everything we can to make you a happy, fulfilled person. I promise you'll have new opportunities. You'll realize that it's not all bad." Only then did the woman pull away, allowing Livia to look at her. Ordinary appearance, simple clothes. But something seemed fake to the girl in that appearance, as if there was no sincerity, no regret, the kind of regret that comes from those who take a child to give a new life. The man stood off to the side, saying nothing, not interacting with either his wife or the girl. Livia noticed that he was clearly not excited about the encounter and probably didn't want to take custody of the child. But there was a dangerous light in his eyes that gave her goosebumps. "Livia, I'd like you to meet him. These are Quincy and Julian, your new foster parents who are almost finished finalizing custody of you. They wanted to meet you before signing the final papers to get to know your new family member. I didn't use their middle names, thinking you'd feel more comfortable that way. You can also call them Mom and Dad if you want. This couple has already given a happy life to 10 children they took in as adults to give warmth and show that the world is not as bad as it may seem. They raised girls just like you, who grew up in an orphanage for a long time without love and affection. The manager smiled, trying to make the moment of familiarity less tense. But it didn't help. Livia stared at her new guardians in disbelief, the uneasy feelings growing. The man's gaze seemed to grow heavier, more focused and attentive to her, as if she were a victim. Goosebumps ran down her back. Why do these people only take adult children? Livia asked loudly and confidently, turning sharply toward the manager. And I wouldn't be surprised if they only take in girls. Don't you think it's strange that they don't take care of little girls, who are much more in need of love and care? The girl looked carefully at the principal, who was clearly unhappy that she was questioning everything again and showing her temper. Right? We only take adult girls because I don't know how to raise teenage boys at all. We've had 3 birth children, all daughters. I know firsthand how to handle a teenage girl. As far as young kids go, they have a much better chance of ending up in a family than you do. I'd even say you have almost none left. We're probably the last people who want to take you into a family. After that, you'll just wait to come of age inside the walls of this institution you've spent your whole life in. This is the best opportunity for you to see the world, to learn what it's like to live in love and care. What does it mean to have a mom and dad? Julian spoke affectionately, not waiting for an answer from the orphanage manager. We just want to show those who are already desperate that this world is not as bad as it may seem at first glance. The woman smiled, but it seemed insincere. Looking at her carefully, the girl took a step back, almost pressing herself into the wall, sensing the danger coming from this couple. Livia was well aware that she had a choice. She could refuse the foster family. She could return to the orphanage at any time and continue living there if the guardians turned out not to be what they were trying to make themselves out to be. But on the other hand, there was a lot of doubt in the girl's soul. What if the first impression was deceptive? What if things aren't really that bad? Suddenly, this couple really wants to make her world a little brighter and better. Inner doubts and hesitations lasted not long, and finally the girl decided to give a chance to the foster family, not even suspecting how it would turn out. Julian and Quincy at first behaved as model parents. Checks from the orphanage came often, and each time it was noted that the girl lives in excellent conditions. For the first time in her life, she had her own bed, the opportunity to go out with friends without restrictions, go to a regular school, and just enjoy the best of her teenage years. It seemed like the decision to allow guardianship was the right one. But it was only in the beginning. Soon the checks became less frequent, and then they decided to visit the family once a year to assess the child's welfare. And from that moment on, the guardians' attitudes and Livia's whole life changed dramatically. Julian and Quincy finally took off their masks and began to show themselves to be exactly the people Livia had thought they were from the day she met them. Quincy did not like noisy company of guests in the house and disobedience. Over time, his desire to control everything turned into despotism. He forbade Livia to leave the house, to socialize with anyone but him and Julian, and to make decisions on her own without first discussing them with him. Worst of all, young Livia, who had no idea why she was being taken into foster care, found herself attracted to the man who became her guardian. This soon played havoc with her. Quincy began drinking frequently. The man did not limit himself in anything and could afford to drop an ugly comment, touch the girl unambiguously, or make her sit next to him to admire her. Livia knew that such behavior was abnormal, but at the same time she couldn't say anything to anyone, couldn't defend herself in any way. Who would she complain to? Who would believe her? Who would want her problems? To none of these questions did she have an answer. She could only hope that the next 3 years would pass quickly and nothing terrible would happen to her during that time, which would leave a mark on the girl forever.
A few months passed. Julian finished 9th grade and started making plans for the summer. She wanted to go to camp, where she was given a free trip from the orphanage to see her friends who stayed in its walls and just have a good time. Among her tasks for the summer was a part-time job where she could put aside at least a small amount of money to spare, but her foster parents had very different plans. During one of the family dinners they had every day, Julian wanted to bring up the fact that she wanted to go to camp in a couple weeks and that she needed to go to the store to get a couple new things for him. But suddenly it was Quincy who started the conversation first.
I got you a part-time job for the summer. You'll work off living in our house and all you eat day in and day out. You're done sitting on our backs. You're a healthy girl. Can't you do anything on your own? It's time to start thinking that everything is not so easy in life and that you need to work to eat good food. If you don't work, you don't eat. In this house. Do you understand? The man sharply pulled the girl's plate to himself, leaving only a glass of sweet tea in front of her, which became her dinner. And listen to me carefully. God forbid you even tell someone that we somehow wrongly bring you up, that you do not like something or you would like to return to the orphanage. Then we will talk to you at home very differently. Do you understand me? Quincy looked at the girl with displeasure and even some hatred. She gave in and nodded slowly. That's a good girl. Your work begins the day after tomorrow in the fields at my acquaintance. He will transfer the money to my card, so don't worry about the salary. It will be safe and sound on my bank card. Livia looked at Julian hopefully, but the woman sat with a completely calm expression on her face, making it clear that she was not going to interfere in the proceedings. The girl, trying to remedy the situation somehow, decided to talk about summer camp. I'd like to go to the summer camp I've been to every year since I went to the orphanage. I don't think I should give up the tradition of going there, because a lot of my friends are there and those I just socialize with. You'll be working this summer. Quincy shouted, not letting the girl finish. And that's out of the question. If you don't want to starve to death, you'll work, you'll do whatever they tell you to do. And your opinion doesn't matter at all. If you're told you'll work, if I tell you to work, you'll work silently as long as I tell you to. Understand? Quincy had not taken his gaze off the girl all this time. It made her uncomfortable. She wanted to hide from the pressure in the air. The man returned to his meal, speaking more calmly. You'll be watched all the time you're working, my friend, and if you do anything wrong, if you say anything unnecessary or just decide to run away, I will be told about it immediately. And then you're going to be in a lot of trouble. Do you understand me? Livia nodded slowly, not wanting to argue, realizing that something like this could only cause more trouble. She didn't want to find out anything, didn't want to stand up for what she wanted, realizing that in this situation she found herself in, she would be on the losing end anyway, which would not only end in a painful fall, but could lead to a completely unexpected outcome. So Livia went to work and started working in the fields, despite the fact that she hadn't even considered this type of employment. She did not know how much she was paid per day, never knew where and with whom she would have to work next. But she understood perfectly well that all the suffering, all the trials were temporary, and someday she would be able to get out of the string of problems. She would be able to stand up for herself. She would be able to become independent and decisive. In the meantime, she had to put up with what was happening in her life, put up with the despotism, with the guardians, put up with the fact that she had to do things she didn't want to do, and just endure until everything was resolved. But she had no idea what lay ahead of her, and that what she was going through now was just the flowers and would soon be the berries. Working in the fields seemed like hell. The heat, the large number of insects, and the constant attention from adult working men who kept calling Livia to go somewhere to rest after work, to get acquainted, or just to have lunch together. But despite all the problems, hard work, and unbearable working conditions, the girl continued to work day in and day out in order not to provoke her guardians, and also to earn something and save for her future. Fortunately for her, the owner of the field, John, turned out to be a very good-natured man and immediately offered the girl to receive part of her wages in cash, which Quincy would not know. All the kids they took from the orphanage worked for me, John said. Their daughters grew up always in love and abundance, never denied themselves anything. Those poor girls lived on water and buckwheat, while their half-sisters ate meat and candy every day. That's when I decided to give them some of their earnings in cash so they could afford something to buy when they came home or when Quincy and his wife and daughters went away. I know firsthand how hard it is to be in foster care. So it's the least I can do to make things a little easier for you. The man smiled sincerely and a little painfully, and it was obvious that all his revelations were true, that he really just wanted to help, just trying to make life a little better for these children. Livia agreed to his terms. A few weeks later, the girl turned 16 years old. She was happy about it, because now she had new rights that no one could take away from her so easily. As time went on, she began to think that she was even getting used to the field work, that she could work here not only this summer, but for the next 2 years to put away as much money as possible. She didn't spend any of what she earned, hoping that in the future it would be enough to at least start a normal life, until she found a better job, not yet realizing how her desire and drive to become self-sufficient and independent would end. Livia, returning home later than usual one weekday, found her foster father in a bad mood. The man sat in his chair and stared at her as she entered, undressed, and made her way to the bathroom without taking his eyes off her. He didn't seem to blink. There was an oppressive atmosphere in the house, and the girl immediately felt that she didn't know how to behave or what to do, what had even happened. She decided to act as if everything was fine and headed confidently to her room. But before she could take a couple steps, she heard Quincy's loud and irritated voice. "How was it for you to steal from your own family, from those who gave you shelter and provided for you, who wanted only the best for you, gave you love and affection? How to be such an ungrateful, indifferent girl who thinks only about how to fill her belly? How to do better for yourself without thinking about others? What's it like to be as pathetic as you are?" The man's voice turned to a shout, and it was clear that a simple conversation wasn't going to end the situation. Quincy had already raised his hand to the girl several times, but it had never ended in anything serious. But this time Livia wasn't sure if it would end the same way as the previous times, when the man's anger had been much less. He continued to stare at her without taking his eyes off her, and she stared back, pretending not to understand what he was talking about. Though her mind was no longer just guessing, but quite clearly realizing what had happened. "And why are you looking at me like that? Like you don't know what I'm talking about? I was saying that I shouldn't take you, that you had an arrogant and unpleasant look from the start, and I saw right through you. And the fool is the one I'm married to. I thought you could be so easily reformed. But it wasn't. A rat is always a rat, even when he puts on sheep's clothing, and you're a prime example of that." The man jumped up from his seat, quickly bridging the distance between him and the girl, and grabbed her arm tightly so that she couldn't move. Through gritted teeth, without pain, he spoke directly into her face. "You little shit. You're going to pay for every dime you stole from your own family. You're going to regret choosing to deceive me and hide things from me. It'll be a lesson to you for the rest of your life. Everyone from orphanages is the same thieves, liars, completely unscrupulous people who know no boundaries. But you are not the first, and will not be the last to learn this bitter lesson on your own skin." Holding Livia's hand tightly, the man began to pull off her clothes, stretching her belt. The realization came almost instantly, and the girl began to frantically think of what to do. She couldn't just let things go, couldn't let what the man was planning to do happen. So she started screaming as hard as she could, just so that someone would hear her, just so that someone would come and spare her from this nightmare she was about to experience, just so that nothing would happen. She couldn't break free, her strength was running out. And at the moment when the girl once again drew in more air to scream and call for help, Quincy yanked her toward him, covering her mouth with his hand so hard that her jaw ached. Panic gripped her. The feeling of helplessness and hopelessness seemed almost palpable. She couldn't break free from the grip, couldn't call for help, couldn't do anything to save her. The thoughts in her head were so chaotic that Livia had no time to think about the effectiveness of one idea before another came to replace it. None of the options seemed effective or feasible, and suddenly one of the best ideas in Livia's mind was to pretend she had lost consciousness. Livia decided to play it off as realistically as possible. Her breathing became ragged, all her muscles relaxed, despite her fear and the intense tension inside. "What, you expect me to believe your act?" the man said. "I wasn't born yesterday either, and I've seen dozens of actresses like you." He squeezed her waist harder, as if squeezing her lower ribs. But the girl didn't make a sound, and that played into her hands. Quickly loosening his grip, causing Livia to hit the floor painfully, the man crouched down beside her, checking her pulse and breathing. "Shit. I don't want you to throw off your skates," he grumbled. "What am I going to say at the next checkup then? Look at the Livia I caught. But it's all right, you're breathing, your heart's beating, so you can go on with what you've started. And if you don't resist any longer, I'd better move everything to a more comfortable place." Quincy walked slowly through the house, picking out a room. At that moment, Livia had a chance to escape. Without thinking, she jumped to her feet and rushed forward. Her pulse pounded in her temples. It was hard to breathe, her eyes blurred. But she couldn't stop. She realized that stopping would mean returning to captivity, to beatings, bullying, and humiliation worse than in the orphanage. She heard Quincy yelling something after her, felt his nasty odor on her skin, the pain of recent events. She knew he'd give up the chase soon, but hiding from him would be difficult. The only true solution seemed to be to go back to where it all began, to the orphanage, to tell those who cared and find help in a place she hated. Livia didn't know the way, but her feet led her to the orphanage, the place where she spent her childhood, where she first fell in love, made friends, and became independent. Stopping at the entrance, she couldn't dare to call or enter. It seemed like a betrayal of little Livia's promise to never come back here. A tear rolled down her cheek. At that moment, she heard soft footsteps behind her and the familiar voice of the principal. "And you have not been spared that fate, have you?" Livia turned around, dumbfounded. The principal remained calm, not a single muscle trembling on her face when she saw the disheveled, crying girl with rope marks on her neck and arms and terror in her eyes. "I thought they'd changed since the last incident, gotten smarter. Stop treating foster kids like that," the principal said. But no. She cast a quick glance at Livia and, with a heavy sigh, added, "I realize you may not believe my words, but there was nothing I could do. These people have great connections and money. They won the court, closed a scandalous case in their favor, and put an innocent girl in a mental hospital with a non-existent diagnosis. They can do a lot of things. And after the last story, everyone was convinced of that. And these people just pretended that nothing happened, that all the nonsense they made up in the courtroom was true, and that they really didn't touch the girls they adopted or became guardians for. And everyone was silent and is still silent to this day. After all, no one knows what they might do to the next person who crosses their path." Emma. Yes, the girl who still managed to break free, who found the strength to talk about everything and return to the orphanage so they could help her. Nothing is known now. She was a pupil of our orphanage. And at the moment when I decided to visit her, it was made clear to me that I should not try to find her. But I did try and I didn't find her. The woman sighed heavily, lowering her head. All the other girls who were taken in by this family were kept in inhumane conditions. And they were all forced into marriage as soon as they turned 18. Some people I know say that they were just sold to rich men who were attracted to them. They just got rid of them for a decent amount of money. But no one has ever been able to prove it, and it's unlikely that they will be able to. The woman looked at the trembling girl carefully, took her gently by the shoulders and said in a firm and confident voice, "Listen to me carefully. You definitely don't belong here. They will find you without much effort. They understand perfectly well that you have nowhere to go and you will go back to the orphanage you grew up in. I won't be able to hide you all this time. I won't be able to hide you anywhere so that you won't be seen during the next inspection. They will demand you back, and I can't refuse for fear of losing my own family. So you need to leave, run away, get out of this town and start a new life. You can't hide from them here and you can hardly run away again if they find you. It's scary to imagine what these people might do to you, so you have no choice but to run away from here. You don't have to come back here, man. You don't have to even think about getting justice. You can't do it anyway. There's no point in even trying. It's going to end very badly for you. So I recommend that you just forget about what you've been through. Well, or at least try to do that and move on with your life. I knew you'd come around sooner or later. Of course, I hoped for the best, but my heart told me that these people wouldn't give up so easily. So here." She handed the girl an envelope that contained a substantial sum of money. Livia shook her head negatively. "I can't take this from you. It's your money. You will need it in the future. And I'll sort it out somehow solve the problem. Don't worry. You don't have to give me all your savings just because I'm in trouble." Livia handed the envelope back. When she noticed the judgmental look in his eyes, she froze, realizing she was making the wrong decision. But something inside kept her from just taking the money, the uncomfortable feeling that she was taking advantage of someone else's kindness. Livia said, "At least leave me your phone number or card number so I can pay you back when I have it. I can't just accept a gift like that. You understand, don't you?" The girl looked hopefully at the orphanage manager. But she was in no hurry to dictate her details. Instead, the woman gently ran her hand over Livia's cheek and whispered so softly and gently that goosebumps ran down her skin. "If money can help you be happy, if it can help you avoid what other girls have had to go through, then I'll be insanely glad I could help you. If things work out well for you someday in your life, and I hope they will, when you can achieve everything you desire, I'll be here waiting for you. I'll be happy to see you again. But even if you can't come, forget about me waiting for you. If you build your happy life, I will be truly happy for you." She pulled the girl to her and hugged her gently, trying with a simple gesture to convey all the warmth and tenderness that was in her soul. Livia always knew that she treated her with warmth and awe. She just hid it. That Livia would grow up to be independent and strong. That she would have no problem overcoming all the obstacles that life was preparing for her. And that her character would be strengthened for future trials and obstacles. Livia took the money, realizing that she had no other option left. With a heavy heart, she left town, believing that she would surely return in the future, sure to thank her as soon as the opportunity arose, as soon as she got back on her feet. But in life, everything is not as simple as one would like it to be. And to achieve the dream, you have to overcome a lot of trials and obstacles that make people not only kneel and bite their elbows, but also experience a terrible loss, disappointment, and unbearable pain, from which everything inside is torn apart. Settling into a new place was difficult. Livia traveled a long distance from her hometown so that Quincy and Julian wouldn't find her. At 16, it was hard to get an apartment. You had to cheat landlords, and fortunately you still managed to find the right housing option. But things were a bit more difficult with work. It turned out that it was very problematic to earn a decent living without at least a specialized secondary education. And so after a few days of searching, realizing that pulling more cannot, Livia got a job in a very dubious office, which was engaged in cleaning houses, apartments, offices, and other places. The pay was not good, but at least it was good. The money was barely enough to cover basic needs, and she had to save for everything else. Day after day, Livia promised herself that she could make her life better, that she could find a better job, that she could earn more, that she could build a happy and carefree life. But fate had other plans for her. 2 years passed like a terrible dream. So many inadequate people, stingy and greedy clients Livia could not imagine. And right after she turned 18, she started looking for a new job and quickly enough found a maid in a local hotel. The salary was promised to be good, and the workers were required to have a minimum amount of knowledge and skills. The main thing was to clean the rooms qualitatively and to be able to communicate with clients. And this experience was enough for the girl. It became a little easier to live, but still the desire for carefree and comfort made her constantly look for new opportunities, constantly try something new, take more work, improve in a new direction. And soon she realized that it was possible to earn big tips simply by being courteous to customers. She was always polite, confident, and ready to fulfill all the wishes of the client regarding cleaning, even if they seemed strange or somehow ambiguous to her. It was at her new job that Livia met Jerry and Diane, who became her best friends. Although the story of acquaintance turned out to be very ambiguous and often caused laughter among those who recognized her. And it all started on a normal working day when Livia was filling out her cleaning schedule to receive payment for the amount of work done. And at one moment she noticed that the room she was cleaning was assigned to a completely different girl, whom she not only doesn't know, but has never seen due to the heavy workload of her shifts. Not wanting to let the situation go to waste and lose the money she was entitled to, Livia went to the hotel manager to find out what was going on and why someone was taking her job for themselves. When Livia entered the office, she immediately pointed to the filled cell in the chart and said, "Good morning, Pamela. Let me get this straight. Why would someone choose to fill in the boxes they like so they can get paid for cleaning other employees' rooms? This room was personally cleaned by me at 3 p.m. That's not my signature. And I didn't see this girl assistant all day. What am I getting humped for cleaning?" Livia stood over the manager's desk as she studied the document. After a few seconds, Pamela shrugged indifferently. "I don't keep track of who cleans rooms and who doesn't. I can only call Dinah so you can find out who cleaned that room." The woman dialed the number and said calmly, "Dinah, dear, come into my office. We need to discuss the cleaning of room 315. There were questions. After a few short remarks, she hung up and turned to Livia. "She'll be here in 10 minutes as she finishes cleaning another room. Sit down and wait so we don't have to look for you later." Pamela pointed to a vacant chair. Livia obediently sat down, realizing that this was the best option. After all, she planned to go home and rest after her shift. A few minutes later, there was a knock on the door. As Livia sighed in relief at the prospect of a quick solution to the problem, a young guy walked in. He glanced at her only briefly and, after saying hello only to the supervisor, walked over to her desk. "Sorry, Pamela, I can't find the cleaning schedule to check in. I'm done for the day and would like to get home soon." Noticing the right sheet, he quickly took it. "Oh, great. Here's the missing one. I'll take it, okay?" The boy was already heading for the exit, but Pamela stopped him. "Ben, we still need that document. You can either wait or fill it out here." She pointed to the second chair, and the guy, hesitating, sat down. "That's good. Do it, and you'll be free to go. I'll distribute the paycheck early next week." Ben nodded silently, returning to the document and carefully making all the marks. After a while, he looked at Livia with displeasure. The look was unkind. The guy got up and walked over to the supervisor's desk. "Why did this lady write that she cleaned room 315 when I was cleaning it now at the end of the shift? What nonsense is that? She couldn't have cleaned there because I'm the one who left the signs that it needed cleaning. The ones the guests put on their doors." Ben took several of those signs out of his pocket and laid them out on the table. He could tell by the number of signs he'd removed how many rooms he'd cleaned during the day. There was silence. Livia stared blankly, not knowing whether to join the conversation or not. Pamela shifted her gaze from the sheet to the boy, and to a surprised Livia. "I'm sorry, you mean you were cleaning room 315 now before you closed your shift, right?" Pamela asked Ben, looking at him carefully. He nodded, whereupon the woman continued. "But this girl here claims that she also cleaned this room and wants to be paid after cleaning it." Ben instantly turned to Livia. The latter flinched at such harsh attention. Then, returning his attention to the supervisor, he muttered, "And who do you believe? This girl who's been working for you for a couple months and is always flirting with customers? Or me, the guy who's worked faithfully at your hotel for several years?" He glanced at Livia again. The barbed words he had said were reflected on her face. The girl was not pleased to hear such a thing, but she dared not interfere until Pamela asked her opinion. "You know how often newcomers try to put in the cleaning of a vast number of rooms in order to get more money. Among the rooms they specify are often those that aren't even habitable. I'm sure if you check the charts, this girl will find the same inconsistencies. Then it will be clear that she's lying." Pamela held up her hand, indicating for the boy to be quiet. Then, in a calm, confident voice, looking Ben in the eye, she spoke. "But also claims to have cleaned the room, and Dinah, whom you've known for years. She says she cleaned it this morning and marked it at once, as she always does. And there's her mark here, as you can see for yourself." The woman pointed to Livia. "This girl came to me and said that the cell may have been filled in by mistake, for the room was cleaned by her. And now you come in saying you cleaned the same room. So two of you three are lying, and the room was cleaned by one of you." "Right." Ben nodded slowly, already realizing where this was going. Livia watched the situation in surprise. "It turns out that there are too many people in our team who don't respect the truth and are negligent in their work. And you know that lying is not respected in our collective. If this situation doesn't resolve itself, I will have to deal with it personally. And those who have lied and taken up my time will be fired. Do you understand that? It's never too late to come clean." The woman looked at Ben carefully, then shifted her gaze to Livia, who recognized that she could be fired for lying, but still didn't leave. At that moment, there was a knock on the door, and an attractive, energetic young woman entered. She walked quickly to the supervisor's desk, tilted her head slightly to the side, and asked what's wrong with the cleaning of room 315. "I'm sure everything is fine, and I haven't even checked." "Everything is, but another problem has arisen," the woman spoke calmly. "The thing is, these two claim to have cleaned the room you signed for, and they want to get paid. Of course, any labor should be paid. But you know that the rules are that the room is cleaned once a day if the customer has posted a demand. Hence, you couldn't all three of you clean one room. I recommend you to solve this issue peacefully here and now, to determine who actually cleaned the room. Because if I do, this story will not end well." Pamela looked at the young men and nodded confidently, signaling that her decision was final and they should decide for themselves who was actually cleaning the room. "Guys, I understand that you want to make money the easy way. But I'm not going to just hand over a room that I spent hours cleaning like a hurricane. So I suggest you just come clean and get back to your jobs. That way you'll avoid getting fired. I don't think you're willing to lose a good job with a decent salary just because of your own ego and pride," Livia said confidently. feeling her body ache and wanting to go home. Let me just put a note that I cleaned the room, and we'll all go our separate ways without arguments and scandals. Okay? She took a step toward the table, wanting to finish what she'd started. But suddenly Ben stood in front of her, who obviously disagreed with what she had said and was about to mark it himself. I'm sorry, baby, but I know you're both lying. After all, I personally just got out of that room myself, having cleaned it, as you said, for hours. Perhaps it was because of its complexity that you decided to take the job for yourself, thinking you'd get some kind of bonus for it. But no, the only thing you get for cheating is termination. And I'll get the paycheck I deserve. The boy turned to the table, already reaching out his hand to sign, as suddenly the pen was sharply pulled out, and Dinah, who was standing only a couple of dozen centimeters away from him, spoke. As if that wasn't enough, handsome. This room was cleaned by me, and you were right to reprimand the newcomer for lying. But don't be like her. And I know that I cleaned that room early in the morning, and that it was in perfect order after I left it. And I'm pretty sure you're just trying to capitalize on our manager's gullibility and make eyes at such a beautiful woman. But I don't think it's going to work, because it's not as easy to fool Pamela as you might think, even with such a pretty boy. A conflict began to brew between the three employees. Each insisted on his own and convinced Pamela that he was the one who cleaned the room and that he should be paid for the work done, not anyone else. For a few minutes, the woman listened carefully to the arguments of everyone present, and then simply decided to enlist the help of the CCTV cameras, from which it would be easy to see exactly what had really happened and why no one had ever admitted to lying. A few more minutes passed, and the footage of the entire workday was reviewed by the woman in rapid succession. Suddenly, she rose abruptly from her seat and spoke. Everyone dispersed to the empty seats. I already know very well which of you are telling the truth and which of you are lying. Therefore, we will now deal with this situation. Everyone froze for a few seconds, scrutinizing the leader, and then followed her demand and actually dispersed to the free seats. Everyone was sure of his rightness, and therefore expected to dismiss the other two employees. But the denouement of the story turned out to be quite different from what it might have seemed at first glance. A few minutes later, looking carefully at one employee and another, Pamela finally began to speak, and the first sentence made everyone wince, not understanding how this could be. You are all telling the truth, and each of you has actually cleaned room 315 during the course of today, she said. Ben wanted to say something, but the supervisor quickly stopped his attempt by raising her hand and signaling that it was best to be quiet at this point. She looked carefully at everyone present and spoke.
You have all cleaned the room at different times, and each time a sign actually appeared on it asking for cleaning. There is a man with a child living in this room, and as you might have guessed, that is why the room is a constant mess and constantly requires the presence of a room attendant. He simply took signs from neighboring rooms, checking with the guests to see if they were needed that day, and each time he posted a request to clean up on his door. Even though our work policy states that you can only get a cleaning once a day, it turns out that each of you actually turned out to be right, and each of you was cleaning the very room that started all the fights in the first place.
But Pamela was silent, creating some intrigue and tension.
I was disappointed that you didn't trust each other, that you immediately started competing and trying to make your friend look bad, she said. It made me realize that our team is not cohesive at all, and therefore the work is more stressful than I would have thought. I would have liked to have a friendlier and more cohesive team.
Unfortunately, among you I have seen only arguments, conflicts, and a complete unwillingness to try to build peaceful relationships. Therefore, you will need to establish relations with each other, at least build them in a neutral tone, so that there were no such situations and conflicts that can not only spoil the overall mood of the team, but also interfere with the work. I advise you to think in advance about how you will build relationships, because if I notice that there are further conflicts between you, I will have to fire some of you to improve the overall mood of the team and reduce aggression and misunderstandings in it. Pamela gestured that everyone was dismissed, and the young people headed for the exit as Livia was about to go home. Suddenly, there was a very interesting suggestion from Ben. Why don't we go to a cafe or a bar to unwind after work and just get to know each other better? We'll sit for a couple hours and then go home or go about our business. What do you think?
The guy looked hopefully at the girls, who clearly doubted such a proposal. Working from morning to night was not as easy as it might seem at first glance, and so Livia was about to refuse, but suddenly Ben continued.
I'll buy you a drink, we'll sit for a while and get to know each other. I would like to spend the evening in the company of such attractive girls. Come on, say yes. Are you so often called by handsome fellows to have a good time? Dinah was the first to give in. She agreed to spend only half an hour in the cafe, after which she would go home. Ben switched to Livia, urging her to spend some time together and just unwind after a hard day's work. After a moment's hesitation, she agreed, more because the guy promised to pay for her, and any option to save money seemed extremely attractive to her. From that evening, the story of the friendship of Livia, Dinah, and Ben began. This trio became simply inseparable. They spent all their free time together, constantly talked and called each other, and even helped each other at work, if someone was very late because of a very dirty room.
But would Livia have known how painful the betrayal of the man she considered one of the dearest in her life would turn out to be? Several times she thought before approaching him.
Time passed. Livia had gotten a promotion at work and a raise, which made her not look for better options, but continue working at the hotel. She was already so used to it. She liked to spend time at work in the company of friends and colleagues and loved the atmosphere that reigned in the hotel. And soon it became the place where she and her future husband, with whom she fell in love literally at first sight, would meet. Livia had long ago made a promise to herself not to fall in love with anyone and not to consider men as objects of adoration. She didn't want to feel the pain and loss after he was gone. She didn't want to become dependent on someone else and waste her own time and energy on a relationship that would be doomed to failure from day one because of her heavy character and too high demands. The heart doesn't ask permission to fall in love. It doesn't ask permission to dream about someone and imagine someone near you. It just feels the need for love and affection. And it gets it regardless of the mind's cry that says it's a bad idea that will only bring pain, disappointment, heartbreak, and a sea of memories that torment a person for the rest of their days. On one of the working days, Livia was cleaning the rooms where a guest was to move in. The girl tried to finish quickly, because many people preferred to check in the morning, to have time to rest, and in the evening to go to parties and bars and clubs, where you can spend time with music, which she often turned on while cleaning. Livia didn't hear the sound of the door opening and turned sharply and crashed into the man. He accidentally elbowed her in the jaw. Livia immediately winced at the sharp pain and slowly squatted down to keep from falling. Her eyes darkened, and the pain seemed hellish, even though the blow was accidental and not too strong. After a few seconds, the man came to his senses and crouched down beside the girl, gently touching her face and looking into her eyes. "I'm fine. Don't worry," Livia whispered, trying to leave the room. "No, you can't do that. You need to see a doctor. This is serious. What if you have a sprain or a fracture?" "I'll never forgive myself for that. Let me take you to the hospital. My car's downstairs." He held out his hands to help Livia up and walk her to the car. But the girl staggered again, not allowing himself to be touched. "Don't struggle, I can see how much pain you're in," the man said. "I swear I didn't mean to hurt you. It was an accident. I just wanted to put my things down carefully and get out so I wouldn't disturb your cleaning. At least let me take you to the nearest hospital. What can I do for you?" The pain forced Livia to agree. After the doctor's examination and x-rays, it turned out to be just a bruise that would go away in a few days. No serious injuries. The man paid the hospital expenses and wanted to take the girl home to rest. However, Livia objected. No, I have to go back to work. You can't just leave like that, it could get you in trouble. Besides, I have a few more rooms to clean. Since there's no serious injury, I don't see any reason to take a sick day. Just take me back to the hotel." Despite her entreaties, Livia insisted on going back to work. On the way they got to talking, and the girl learned that the man's name was John. He had come to this city to interview for a well-paying job. He never had a wife and children, but he dreamed of a strong family, a daughter in full understanding with his spouse. John strived for perfect relationships and never fell in love with girls at first sight. Until now. The words that Livia sympathized with him embarrassed the girl. After all, she wasn't used to receiving compliments of that nature. She had been told she was beautiful, graceful, attractive, and all that sort of thing. But no one had ever told her that he had fallen in love with her at first sight. That's why the man's confession made something pleasant spill inside. Some unusual warmth, and a smile appeared on the girl's face. Such a change was hard not to notice. and Quincy immediately realized that he was able to charm the one that he liked so much and fell into his heart.
In the hotel, the man was in no hurry to part with Livia, offering her help and even money for what happened so that she could have a day off. But the girl refused everything. She didn't want to feel obligated, didn't want to disadvantage Quincy in any way or make him feel obligated. She just wanted to get back to work quickly, to forget about those strange feelings that had been overwhelming her for the past couple hours.
I'm sorry, but you have to at least have dinner with me to make up for what happened. And I feel terrible about just leaving you alone after everything that's happened. That's not how my parents raised me, and if my grandmother saw me leaving a girl after I caused all her problems myself, she would just kill me. The guy looked at Livia with a smile, expecting her to answer, but the girl was silent. Okay, let's do it this way. I'll wait for you at 8 at the restaurant under this hotel. And of course I'll pay for anything you want. If you do agree to keep me company, if you don't want to spend the evening with me, you can just not come. And I'll understand, okay? He smiled and headed to his room after saying goodbye. Livia didn't know what to do. Some part of her frantically wanted to meet Quincy again, just have a nice chat, spend time with him, just stare silently out the same window. The other said it wasn't a good decision, that falling in love wasn't in her plans at all, and that it wouldn't be as easy as she would have liked to get out of it. Time passed, evening was approaching, and the girl could not make a final decision. Not knowing which option would be better, and whether it was worth giving a man any hope at all, if she did not know what she wanted from this life, and whether she was ready for love. Quincy was waiting for the girl in the restaurant. At the agreed time, he took only coffee, wanting to order food after she arrived. Somehow he was sure that Livia would agree to his proposal, but 5 minutes passed, 10, 15, and she was still gone. She still hadn't shown up at the restaurant after half an hour or an hour. And at the moment when the man began to think that she would not appear, a fragile female figure in an incredibly beautiful azure evening dress appeared at the entrance. He didn't even recognize her at first, couldn't believe that she had come to him after such a long wait after all. Livia slowly approached the table, sat down in a neighboring seat, and modestly lowered her eyes to the floor. She didn't know how she should behave, and was completely clueless about what to say and do to make a good impression. She remained silent, and the silence was becoming awkward when the man decided to start talking first. "You look absolutely beautiful. I could not imagine that a girl could change beyond recognition. You are like an angel who came down from heaven to take my life with his light." The man spoke so beautifully and sincerely that the girl was embarrassed. A slight blush appeared on Livia's cheeks from such a warm greeting, and she whispered in a quiet voice. "It was all my best friend Dinah lent me her dress, saying that it would perfectly emphasize all my advantages and hide my imperfections."
Livia herself didn't know why she had confessed, to be honest, and it made her even more embarrassed. She looked at the man who had been admiring her beauty all this time and added,
"You have also made excellent preparations for our meeting, I see. You look marvelous. That suit suits you very well. It fits perfectly." The couple had a quick conversation. The evening flew by as they talked about future plans, dreams, and aspirations. And at the end of the evening, John made the girl promise to meet again, to have a good time again, and get to know each other a little better. Livia agreed, even though her mind was screaming that this was a bad idea that would break her heart. She didn't want to give up such an enjoyable time in the company of a man who was crazy about her so easily. She simply promised herself not to fall in love with him, not knowing that keeping her promise wouldn't be as easy as she might think. The couple met almost every night, and the girl herself did not notice how she began to feel warm feelings for the man. She missed him and felt sad on those evenings when she couldn't meet him. She wanted to see him all the time, to spend as much time together as possible, to know everything about him that John so carefully tries to hide, not knowing that the truth can bring a sea of pain and disappointment. In one of the regular meetings, the man said that soon he would have to leave the hotel, as he plans to rent an apartment closer to work. Such news did not upset the girl, but definitely threw her into a stupor. And the question that had been going around in her head all evening came out loudly and desperately, so that she even shuddered. Does this mean that our pleasant evenings are over, and now we will no longer be able to see each other and have a good time in each other's company, right? There was already an answer to this question in her head, which sounded quite logical. But the man's words made Livia jump, for she had not expected to hear such a thing. "Of course not," he said. I'd hoped you'd agree to move into the apartment with me and start building a more serious relationship than just meeting in the evenings. Don't think I'm rushing you or forcing you to make a decision right now. But I would be madly happy if you agreed to become not just my companion for the evening, but my other half." The man looked at the girl who was sitting across from him and looked completely confused. It seemed that she hadn't expected such an offer from John, though Livia was well aware of how many times those words had already rolled around in her head. She just hadn't expected to hear them. Noticing the girl's stupor, the man hurriedly added, "You just don't make a hasty decision, and I can wait for you to think about it. Until weighing all the pros and cons and until you decide whether you really want it. I will not pressure you. I will not rush you. You can think about it as much as you want." "Okay." "I can't do that," Livia whispered, realizing that her next confession would be the beginning of the end, and that once she'd said it, there was no going back. But she couldn't do it any other way. She couldn't just deceive John and give him false hopes, knowing full well that she had completely different values. "I can't just start living with a man without a proposal or marriage. I was raised very differently. I just can't betray the one who raised me, who put all her time and effort into me, who told me about love and that everything that is done in this world is God's will. This is wrong. I can't just give up everything that's precious to me just because of how I feel about you, you know." The girl looked up at the man, expecting to see sadness and disappointment in his eyes. There was no surprise or confusion in his gaze, only the same warmth as before. Dinah's words did not seem to embarrass him at all, but John did not pursue the subject further. He simply changed the conversation, trying not to return to it, the very subject that had troubled her so much. Livia was sure that their relationship was over. John had checked out of the hotel without even saying goodbye, without leaving a note or a message. All day she was sad, thinking about how things could have been different if it hadn't been for her stupid principles, if it hadn't been for her harsh upbringing in the orphanage, if she had kept silent then. A black hole seemed to have formed inside, swallowing up all the good things and leaving an emptiness, a feeling of desolation.
After work, Livia decided to go to the restaurant where she and John spent almost every evening. To feel sad, to think about how to move on, to get rid of the oppressive state, to stop worrying about the smallest things. Nothing seemed to fix her, but as she entered, she noticed John, as if waiting for someone. Livia walked over, looking questioningly into his eyes. He smiled and invited her to their favorite table to talk and have a good time, just like the old days.
The evening flowed normally, but for some reason Livia felt like not everything was the same. She was expecting tears, a feeling of utter loneliness at parting. Instead, when there were only a few customers left in the restaurant, John pulled out a velvet box. Getting down on one knee and looking into Livia's eyes, he spoke warmly and affectionately. "I want to spend every day of my life with you. To see your happy smile day in and day out. I want you to be by my side in sorrow and in joy. I want us to raise our beautiful daughter together. I want you to stay with me always. I realize that to you, my proposal may seem impetuous, strange, or frightening. But after a day spent away from you, I realized I can't bear to live like this every day. I can't live without your smile, sweet blush on your cheeks, without your voice and unique eyes. You will be my wife." John looked at Livia attentively, holding open a box with a sparkling, incredibly beautiful ring. There was silence in the hall, as if it were just the two of them and no one else. Livia stood up and held out her hand to John, forcing him to rise. Looking into his eyes, she spoke softly so that only he could hear. "I will be your wife, but only on condition that you will always be so tender and sensual. You will love me in sickness and in health, and no more elbowing me in the face." Livia smiled and John laughed, realizing she'd deliberately added irony to break the tension. As he slipped the ring onto her slender finger, applause erupted in the hall. Livia smiled, a tear slowly rolling down her cheek. Whether it was relief after the excitement and worry, or happiness at the thought that she would spend her life with the man she loved. But she didn't know that happiness could be short-lived, and for minutes of joy she would have to pay for hours of pain, which would be extremely difficult to get through. But now her life was exactly as she had dreamed and imagined. Next to Livia is a loving and beloved man who is ready to do anything for her. They decided not to organize a lavish celebration, but just to get married in a church. Livia had no doubt that her decision to marry John was the right one. She proudly and sincerely said her vows in church, realizing that she would never have another opportunity to choose a spouse and marry him. Time passed. The relationship and harmony seemed to be perfect. A few months later, they decided to take a girl, Julia, from an orphanage to give her a new life, a loving family, and to show that this world is not as bad and cruel as it may seem at first glance. The girl quickly got used to the new family, began to call Livia Mom and John Dad. Life seemed wonderful. They had everything for happiness. But everything went wrong when John was fired from his job for systematic absenteeism and negligence. Turns out he had several $1 million in loans. Why didn't you tell me that we had loans, that we owed something to the banks, and that we had a huge amount of money to pay back? What were you borrowing money for anyway? We had a good life. We could afford a lot of things. We didn't need anything. What's wrong? Livia asked after she had put her daughter to bed and was alone with her husband.
She could not believe that all this was happening to her, that after a white streak came a black one. And it would not be easy to solve the problem. I didn't want to bother you for nothing. I thought I could start my own business, a small business that would allow us to no longer work and would generate a good income. In an effort to find the right direction and grow in it, I was missing work. Yeah, but it was for our future, for our happiness, you know.
John seemed to be saying something ridiculous, not realizing himself that his words sounded implausible, even hysterical. Livia closed her eyes and sighed heavily, trying to calm down and put her thoughts in order. When the man spoke again, taking her hands and looking into her eyes. Yes, I was wrong. I couldn't make things work for us. I couldn't pay off the loans myself, and I left us in debt. But that's the main thing, isn't it? I've admitted my mistake. I realize how long I'll have to work to pay it all off, and I'll find a new job. I promise you that. Just give me some time, I'll figure out how to solve everything. The man looked at his wife carefully, seeing that she doubted his words, hesitated to make a decision, and there was distrust and fear in her gaze. Then he decided to resort to manipulating Livia's feelings. Taking her hands in his, he looked into her eyes and softly spoke in such a way that the girl flinched at the sudden change of tone. I know perfectly well that you love me, and I'm sure that you so easily will not leave me because of one small mistake which we will definitely correct. And I love you madly. If I had known that some money would make such a big difference in the way you feel about me, if I had known that after my attempt to give us a carefree life you would start to doubt my feelings, I would never have taken out those loans and I would never have kept it from you. If I had only known that it was so important to you. John, I realize this is a very difficult situation right now, but let's keep calm. Remember how much we love each other and how much our family means. A little thing like this shouldn't ruin our relationship and deprive our daughter, Dinah, of a father. I believe that you still love me, darling. John continued to look into Livia's eyes, not allowing her to look away. Livia sighed heavily, believing she was doing the right thing, and replied, Of course I love you and I believe that our love will overcome everything. Livia closed her eyes, feeling a revolution in her soul, as if she were making a mistake, but not realizing which one. It seemed that the world had become unreal, as if everything had changed, as if she was no longer that naive girl who fell in love with a grown man and believed that everything would be all right, despite the obstacles.
Livia was working for two, while John was looking for a job, interrupting random earnings for a pittance. But he was in no hurry to get a full-time job, saying he didn't want to work for pennies or in a specialty. Livia took extra shifts, working days and nights to feed her family and pay off her loans, which had become a source of anxiety because of calls and threats from debt collectors.
Several months went by like that, and John never found a suitable job. Perhaps it would have gone on for a long time, if not for one phone call that changed everything in Livia's life. On another hard weekend workday, Livia was sitting helplessly in her room when her phone rang. The name of the person she loved more than life appeared on the screen. Picking up the phone, she spoke softly.
Yes, honey, what's wrong? Or did you just miss me and called to tell me you love me so much?
Amber often called her foster mom at work to say warm words or to confess that she missed her, and it was very supportive of Livia in a difficult period. But this time the girl was silent for a long time after the question, which made Livia nervous.
Honey, what's wrong? Are you doing well? Don't be silent, please.
Livia was already starting to panic, imagining scary pictures. when suddenly Amber spoke quietly and uncertainly. "Mommy is home. Daddy and his naked aunt are drinking wine and laughing loudly. I'm scared." The girl's words seemed like a sentence. Livia had thought before that John might be cheating on her, spending time while she worked overtime to pay off his loans. But there was no proof. Now, however, after her daughter's call, there was no doubt that it wasn't a delusional fantasy. Livia was silent, going through dozens of thoughts, when suddenly she heard her daughter's voice again, distressed and quiet. "Mommy, what should I do? They are laughing very loudly, and it makes me scared. Daddy forbade me to leave the room and said that if I disobeyed him, I would stay in the corner all night. I'm very thirsty. Are you coming home soon?" At the last sentence, the girl's voice trembled. Livia realized she was crying, though she tried to hide it. That's what they had been taught to do in the orphanage, hide weakness to survive. The realization that her daughter had to do the same made everything inside her clench. She couldn't let Amber lose her childhood, couldn't let someone treat her like this. The decision had to be made quickly and without hesitation. "Honey, I'll be home in 15 minutes and we'll figure this out," she said. "Stay in your room and don't tell your father I'll be home soon. Let it be a surprise." With her daughter's assent, the woman rushed for the exit. Her blood was pounding in her temples, and hundreds of thoughts were swarming in her head. She was well aware of the mistake she had made. Why did it always seem to her that something was wrong in her life, something out of place? Now there was no doubt the problem lay in the decision to become the wife of an almost stranger. Her mind screamed that it was the biggest mistake of her life. But everyone learns from mistakes, right? The main thing is to be able to recognize them, correct them, and get rid of them in time. The drive home took the least amount of time. Everything seemed to have been set up for Livia to catch her husband cheating on her. No traffic jams, no accidents, and the cab was waiting right outside the hotel. In life, everything happens as it should. Even a sad experience is also an experience, albeit one that brings pain, disappointment, and an emptiness that can never be erased. As she stepped outside her house, Livia was still hesitant to imagine how events would unfold. She wanted to avoid shouting, not to scare her daughter, to separate from her husband calmly. She was ready for that. Until she opened the door and saw the scene unfolding in the living room. John was sitting on the sofa with a glass in his hand, and next to him, with her legs thrown over him, was a half-naked Dinah in translucent lingerie that hid almost nothing. Pain, resentment, disappointment all mixed into one lump that overwhelmed Livia. She couldn't believe that she would have to endure not only the betrayal of her husband, but also one of the people closest to her. John and Dinah turned around at the sound of the door opening. When they saw Livia, they froze in bewilderment. The man's gaze was filled with incomprehension and fear, while Dinah froze, unable to believe what was happening. After a few seconds, she jumped up, trying to cover herself with a blanket from the couch. A blush flooded her face, while John turned visibly pale.
The man rushed toward his wife, reaching out his hands to touch her. But Livia recoiled sharply, giving him a hateful and cold look that made him uncomfortable.
"It's not what you thought," John whispered. "Dinah just came to see you. You were out, and I suggested that she wait. I didn't know when you'd be back. She brought wine, and I offered to open a bottle while we waited for you." Then Dinah spilled wine on her dress and immediately started taking it off to wash it. You know how hard it is to wash wine. She asked if she could wait at our house while the dress dried. I said yes, because I have a wife I love and naked other women don't appeal to me. Her dress is already dry. Dinah can get dressed and join us for some of your favorite wine, dear. John tried to touch his spouse again, but she would not allow him to do so. She stepped back sharply, which made the man lose his balance for a moment. But he regained it immediately and added confidently, "I realize how implausible everything may seem, but everything is exactly as I tell you. Just trust me. Why would I lie to you? Besides, you trust me, right? I've always told you the truth, and I love you very much, darling." Livia shifted her gaze to Dinah, who had been sitting silently on the edge of the couch the whole time, knowing full well that her friend wouldn't believe everything the man had said. She did not try to justify herself, nor did she try to distort the facts. She just watched what was happening, realizing what an uncomfortable situation she had gotten into because of her simple desire to have fun and have a good time. After a few seconds, she took her eyes off her friend and looked at her husband again with displeasure and at the same time sadness, speaking quietly.
Today I saw Dinah as she was leaving after cleaning a few rooms. She asked me what time I was leaving for work. I replied that I would be staying late. She knew full well you were home and looking for work. I can only conclude that she came to see you. You and she weren't expecting me back, were you? And there are no powder marks or water stains on the dress, though there always are.
Livia took a step toward her husband, stopping a few centimeters from his face and looking intently into his eyes, knowing that John wouldn't dare touch her that way. One more thing. Amber called and said you banned her from the room while you were sitting with your naked aunt. She didn't call to complain. She called because the baby was thirsty. And you threatened to make her stand in the corner all night if she didn't listen. And you know what? I realized that I made the biggest mistake of my life when I decided to become your wife. Livia turned abruptly and was about to go to her daughter's room to talk to her, but suddenly John's irritated voice sounded behind her.
It's all because of your friend Dinah. She's the one who came to our house, undressed and told Amber to stay in her room or she'd get the wrong idea. That's why I told Amber not to come out while Dinah was naked. I didn't lay a finger on her, and I didn't threaten Amber. It's all bullshit. The man's calm tone grew more and more irritated with each new word. He didn't seem to believe the nonsense he was talking. But Dinah intervened, not wanting to be blamed.
What nonsense? You invited me to your house to look after Amber while you were at the interview. Instead, you got me drunk on wine and started hitting on me. Don't even try to pin this on me. This is all your fault. You're the one who swore to me that Livia wouldn't find out. And now you're not only embarrassing me, but you're trying to make it look like it's my fault. No way. Be a man and admit your mistakes. It was your idea that failed. Say it out loud. Shut up. The man shouted sharply, coming at Dinah. Don't you dare besmirch my name. Don't you dare drag me into your games. Livia shouted sharply, forcing her friend and spouse to shut up and pay attention to her. I don't care what was really going on here. I don't care who started it and who continued it. You are both adults and independent people. Take responsibility for what you say and do, and stop acting like dogs. You were both fine with everything that went on in that living room, and frankly, I don't care how it started anymore. I've seen enough, and I've made my own conclusions, which are none of your business. I'll just pack up my things, get Amber, and we'll leave. And you can stay together or apart for all I care. Just leave me and my baby alone. Livia turned and went to Amber's room, who was huddled on the bed, covering her ears. Everything clenched inside, and Livia hurried to reassure her daughter. It's okay, sweetie, it's all over now. You and I are going to pack our things now and go traveling together. Okay? We'll go to the place where your mom grew up and we'll live there together, happily and peacefully. Livia smiled, trying to make her words sound convincing, realizing that her voice was shaking and that she had no energy left at all to solve problems. She pulled Amber tightly against her. What about Daddy not coming with us? Amber asked suddenly. He's my daddy. He wanted me to be his daughter. Isn't he going to be my daddy from now on?
Oh, honey. Not everyone can be a good daddy. And this uncle couldn't, Livia said. Good dads don't act like that. Good dads don't leave their daughters without water or food, and good dads certainly don't punish their daughters the way he wanted to punish you. Maybe all you need is a good mum who will love you, always be there for you, and support you in your time of need. Maybe the two of us will be fine without Daddy. What do you think?
Livia looked into the girl's eyes, realizing she couldn't forgive John even for her sake. Whatever Amber answered and whatever happened next, she nodded with relief. In that moment, Livia felt the overwhelming burden of separating her child from the man she thought was her father fall from her shoulders. John had tried to talk Livia out of her decision, begging her to forgive him, swearing it would never happen again. However, she was adamant, packing her things and taking Amber with her. Livia returned to her hometown, the small town she herself had once fled from her foster parents. She felt like she had come home, to a place where she was truly loved simply for what she was. Gaining her strength, Livia knocked on the door of the head of the orphanage. She held her breath, just hoping she still worked there. Clutching her daughter's hand tighter, she waited impatiently for the door to open. And then, after an unbearably long second, the doors swung open, revealing the one Livia loved so much. I'm so glad I can just hug you again, Livia said affectionately, throwing herself around the woman's neck. "Thank you for teaching me to value myself and for making me realize what true love is." The woman held Livia close to her, sighing heavily and glad in her heart that everything had turned out just the way she wanted it to. Livia and Amber stayed in town. The girl repaid her debt to the orphanage manager. Livia's foster parents had either died or moved away. Livia never understood the reason, but the feeling of freedom and security explained a lot. She was starting a new life with a clean slate, becoming again the same small and lost girl she had once been. And she made herself promise to show Amber a better life, one filled with the love and care and warmth and affection that she herself had always lacked.
The weather turned bad in an instant, as if someone had accidentally knocked down the settings. The sky was covered with clouds. It became dark, and not drops, but whole jets of rain poured down on the ground. Mason, an experienced veterinarian, turned on his fog lights and slowed down. Today, he had another unfortunate animal brought to him that had been hit by a car. Luckily, kind-hearted people managed to run to the vet in time. The kitty survived. But how many of them are left to die by the roadside? "It's amazing," Mason said, turning to Ava, his friend and partner. "How do they run over these dogs and cats? You have to be blind." "Oh, Mason," Ava replied, "animals aren't people after all. They don't always sense danger." "No," argued the veterinarian. "I've always said and still say they live more rational lives, especially dogs." "Dogs?" The woman was surprised. "They're nice, of course, but they have brains. I'm sorry, my little bunny. They just don't have brains." "Dogs are my weakness," Mason said passionately as he sat behind the wheel of a brand new Ford pickup truck. "I've worked with all kinds of animals, but my favorite thing in the world is dogs. I love those dogs. They can't solve a math problem, but they can figure out where to get food. Isn't that intelligence?" For a while, the vet and his partner drove in silence. The abominable weather was forcing him to pay maximum attention. Then the man realized that Ava might have misunderstood his words. He turned all red and blushed, and then he blurted out, "I'm sorry, dear," Mason said. "I forgot to tell you that of all the animals, I love you the most. You're the closest to me." Now it was Ava's turn to blush. He was comparing her to his patients again. However, the woman was too tactful to point out to her partner the inadmissibility of such analogies. In his compliment, even if it didn't work, he was trying. "Watch the road, darling," she said. "See how nasty the weather is. A good master wouldn't kick his dog out." Nature's mood had really turned nasty today. It was pouring rain, strong winds, and on top of that the visibility was abysmal. But the car was warm and cozy, and the body of the Ford reliably absorbed all the street noises. Powerful headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the road for dozens of meters ahead. "Calm down, my dear," the vet said with a smile. "I'll get you there safely. My car is my fortress." "Why did you buy yourself a pickup truck?" Ava stretched out. "There's no room in the back row." The woman hated those American toys for big boys. In her mind, a pickup truck was just a waste of money. If she had her way, she would have bought a huge minivan or even a minibus that could seat a whole family, along with all the toys and stuff. Mason, though, didn't get the hint at all. Didn't buy this one back either. "Honey, the pickup is for my patients," he said. "You know it's hard for us to afford a driver and special transportation. This way, the body is at the complete disposal of the poor animals." "That's great, and you won't have to inhale their odors. Even though I've told you 100 times there's nothing disgusting about them." Ava could only say nothing. She loved animals, but separately and from a distance. She could never keep more than one pet in her house, and one was a huge responsibility. But Mason's different. He's a genius in the world of veterinary medicine. He also knows how to do everything. It's like the animals lay out their symptoms to him, and he hears their complaints. "Oh crap," cussed the vet again. "These blind drivers who can't see cats and dogs have ruined my mood. And you can't even hold them accountable. I take away my license in my car for that kind of thing." Mason was sure he could pass a burning car or even a bicyclist. Pass the house on fire. It's just that he'd never been in those situations before. But he's never passed a dog that's been run over. He chose his profession to be a veterinarian, an animal rescuer. Mason had dreamed of going into animal welfare at the state level, but there was no time for that. "You're such a good doctor." Eva praised him and decided to go and head on. "I think you'd be a great father too." At this point, the vet didn't hear her, immersed in his own thoughts. They had already passed the freeway and turned toward the township where their cabin was located. Those bums at the power company had done something wrong again. The lights on the tall poles weren't on. Mason turned his headlights to maximum brightness and looked at the road. He slowed his speed to 15 miles an hour. "Why aren't you saying anything?" Eva asked, not waiting for an answer to her line about her father. "I agree with you completely," the man replied. His partner glowed. "Does he really want children? He literally never leaves the side of his animals. Then he smells like God forgive him. No, he should open his own clinic a long time ago and keep his practice to a minimum. I mean, look at him. He's like an executive. And my God, he looks just like the president. Mason looks just like Mr. Bunn when he was younger. He went to law school and worked as a lawyer. Well, to each his own. If her man didn't have to work 24 hours a day, they could have had a baby a long time ago. The weather's brutal," the vet said and squinted. "I can't see our house." "I'm following the instruments, honey." "Drive carefully," Eva nodded. "You can't be too careful." "I'm always careful," Mason agreed eagerly. "It's my principle. If you're not sure, don't overtake. If you don't know what's next, slow down." He wanted to say something else, but then he hit the brake. The wheels squealed, and Ava with him. They saw something on the road that made their hearts clench. Jack is a young anarchist. He's not even 20. Griff is different. He had eaten not only his dog in the revolutionary struggle, but also a few minor politicians. At 35, he's realized he's done too much for this country. Now it's just a matter of taking his rightful place somewhere at the top. And make sure that all the elite, the rich people in expensive suits, lose their capital. In this country, you can't achieve anything by your own labor, Jack resented. Yes, I have no education. Yes, I didn't finish high school. But why, pray tell, do I have to work for $10 an hour? Do I look like a volunteer? I'd rather not work at all than slave for pennies. I agree, Griff nodded. You're just young and green, but you're moving in the right direction. Yes, the world is an unfair place, and it's unfair in everything from resource allocation to wages. But it's not about money. What is it about? Jack asked. The very structure of the system, the adult anarchist explained. Until you get to the top, you're nobody. And if you're already on some floor, Trump Tower or Bush Tower, you don't want to let outsiders in. You'll smoke them out by any means necessary. Call them terrorists, abusers, gaslighters, anything to keep someone else from taking your place. Jack sighed. In his early 20s, he had all sorts of ideas in his head, often so contradictory as to be mutually exclusive. On the one hand, he wanted to be rich, to have a house where he could gather classically close friends from all over the world, to buy a huge bus to take like-minded people to rallies. On the other hand, he wished there was no money at all, that everyone got exactly what they deserved, to do the work he liked. Jack was sure that in such a world, he would have the most deserved place, but to build this marvelous order, the old had to be destroyed. Unions are being squeezed, Riff complained. Have you heard about the new reform? Now even this slave order will be gone. Feudalism is coming. Pure feudalism. Of course it is, Jack blurted out. He didn't know what the word feudalism meant, but there was no stopping the young man. It's a misunderstanding, not a reform. It looks like stupidity, but it's actually a crime. The young man read the draft of the new law, but understood nothing about it. Then he tried to understand the opinions of experts, but there were even more unfamiliar words. Perhaps he should not have skipped school lessons in such quantities. However, his left-wing comrades told him that the innovations would simply destroy labor unions, that only those unions would be preserved that fully satisfied the current government, and workers' rights would once again be trampled on. I think we should show who is the boss in this country, Jack said with heat. Like in the good old days, there was a time when workers were considered. You could buy a brand new car for half a year's wages. He read stories about movements that governments called extremist, but he realized that such a thing was unthinkable now. No one would approve of saviors who were guided only by violence. Griff, who still dreamed of getting into big politics, was not eager to engage in terror either. He was reviled by everyone, east and west. You understand, Griff said. We have to take deliberate steps. Don't forget that we have comrades behind us. And every action we take must be weighed very carefully. Party. One name for it. Jack had seen these pathetic gatherings of marginalized people, and they didn't make a good impression on him. At the best of times, there were about 20 people in attendance, and it seemed only to drink cheap beer and barbecue after a heated discussion of Marxist ideals. Of course, Griff had his sights set on a leadership position in the shop stewards union, but this organization did not inspire the young anarchist much. To be a big shot there, but only to get $20 an hour from nothing. We need an action that will get us talked about, Jack said with inspiration. We've got to get to somebody at the top of these corrupt politicians and tell them what we think of this system, where the only rights a worker has are the right to a free cremation after death. From the very top? Griff was surprised. He liked the young comrade's pressure. Maybe you're talking about that one. Don't say it, the young man demanded. He believed in all conspiracy theories combined, especially the one that every cell phone had sensors that triggered keywords, like saying president, Twin Towers, or Pentagon. Those were words he simply never said, replacing them with euphemisms. Wow, Griff marveled. I envy your tenacity. What would you like to do to him? Not him, Jack shook his head. Let's be realistic. You can't get within a stone's throw of someone you can't name. They're watching everything, controlling everything. I'm talking about the people closest to him, his loved ones. The anarchist rubbed his temples. I admit I've had similar thoughts. Nodded the young man. But how do we get people to talk about us? Murder is so petty. Kidnapping a child or a wife is inhuman, but our action must not be toothless. We must show this country that we can act, that we've been written off too soon. I think I have an idea, Griff smiled. You'll like it. It did seem like a strange idea, but it made sense to Jack. And most importantly, if they succeeded, their names would be written in gold in the history of the American resistance. It's hard to explain the friendship between man and dog. It's beyond reason. It's as if the master and his pet become one. Mr. Bine loved Wookie. As a child, he already had a dog, Roy, a huge and obese Street Bernard. Together they grew up, the future president of the United States upward and the dog outward. The dog was smart, polite, and also very voracious. His appetite was legendary in his hometown of Binda. Give him an elephant and he would eat it, complained the grandfather of the future president, a very economical and thrifty man. Not a dog, but a ruin. But he is guarding us, the young man carefully expressed his disagreement. For such a thing you can feed him once more. Guarding? The grandfather was indignant. Yes, he did not even wake up when those hooligans wanted to steal my bike. Good thing I noticed and kicked their greedy asses. The dog really wasn't equipped to guard his grandfather's huge farm. It was an area that a dozen dogs couldn't control. But that didn't upset young Binda in the least. Only with a dog he felt a mental connection, complete mutual understanding, and for such a thing he could forgive his pet anything. Laziness in the first place. When Bind was 18 years old and was taking his college exams, Roy suddenly departed for dog heaven. At that time, the dog had already passed his second decade, but he looked very alert and healthy. Nothing foreshadowed trouble, but a king. The future president was so upset that he forbade to ever get another pet. I swear I'll never get a dog again, young Bind said. Roy's death is a great loss to me. Yeah, it's like burying a friend. What's a brother's friend? Sometimes I feel like his big carcass is right here, right next to me. I can even hear him snoring at night. The future president's greatest burden was that he was far away when his pet died. He didn't share his last hours with him, didn't give him a bowl of water, and didn't even give him a last hug. He had kept his promise for 40 years, no less. Graduated with honors from the university, where he was president of the faculty for the first election, which he won. Worked a little in his specialty, but quickly found himself in politics. And now, when the 70-year mark loomed on the horizon, a small animal appeared in his life. At a regular meeting with voters, someone called a dog breeder, and she brought 5 puppies. One of them nimbly outran the guards and fell right into Mr. Bindu's lap. He rolled over onto his back, and the president couldn't resist the temptation to pat the little dog's belly. In front of him was a shaggy-eared, odd-looking little fellow who was not the least bit embarrassed by his ornamental appearance. Unlike Roy, the little dog was small, but he had a big heart. It was love at first sight. Mr. Bind took him in his arms, and from then on they were almost never parted. Whose baby is this? The president asked excitedly, stroking the puppy on the head. Yours, the woman replied, smiling awkwardly and looking out from behind the guards. May my litter always accompany you. Mr. Bind threw up his hand in his trademark salute, though the word litter amused him. He had been given many gifts, even a plot of land on the moon, but this was the first time he had ever been given a dog. The little fellow had chosen him, though. Who is he to take the American dream away from a citizen of the United States, even if that citizen is a dog? Wacky accompanied the president like a shadow. This dog stood out from the rest of the breed. For one thing, he was smart. The little dog learned several commands and also unmistakably distinguished his people from strangers. Secondly, Pekingese was physically developed. Both front and back legs were longer and stronger. He could jump onto a sofa or chair and climb back down without hurting himself. It's a mockery of the breed, a professional dog handler called by an aide told the president. Absolutely healthy, vaccinated, but we call that kind of thing a marriage. I call him Wacky, Mr. Bang replied good-naturedly, though he found the dog breeder's words discriminatory. No, such language should be avoided, even when it came to animals. The president was fond of his dog. His children were long gone, and he spent minimal time on his grandchildren for safety reasons. Only Wokey was always there. At times, Bang felt as if the dog listened and understood him, and as if giving advice on the level of thought. Don't quarrel with the third world, the Pekingese once told him, and Bang changed his mind about introducing new restrictions. Like Roy, Wokey didn't demand too much. He was willing to lie around for hours under the table somewhere. He'd run outside to take a piss or tackle a tougher task. He also became a general favorite of his team. Every White House staffer considered it his duty to babysit and feed Wokey. Heavy feeding, however, did not lead to obesity. The doggy remained as agile and lean as possible. But one day the dog went missing. Mr. Bang could have sworn he'd seen the dog a few minutes ago while he was giving another interview. And then Wacky disappeared. Where had he gone? That was the question he put to his entourage. Half an hour later, a bewildered aide entered the office without knocking. The president sighed. Although he treated his subordinates leniently, Patrick knew exactly the condition. Called before reporting. Mr. President, whispered the aide. Mr. President, trouble, tragedy, emergency. Well, go ahead, Mr. Bundu waved his hand. Savey time, Patrick. We could spend it building a better future for our country. Yes, of course, nodded the aide. But, and as the staffer finished his report, the president experienced a feeling similar to Roy's loss. Pain, longing, and incomprehension. However, he kept his feelings safely hidden this time. There was no reason for the others to see him suffer. The music was playing loudly in the car, so loud that the driver and passenger had to yell, but that was fine with them. The American wind blew through the open windows, which they both thought was the smell of freedom. At times, the young boy and his much older companion would sing along to the radio, but they bragged more about their good fortune. I told you the White House was a thoroughfare, Griff grinned as they rode in the van. A thoroughfare for simpletons. I'm surprised Trump hasn't taken up residence there. Yeah, Jack nodded. Maybe we should have had that. The president, the rich. That? And the guy made a meaningful gesture with his hand, as if drawing a dotted line around his neck. That's the kind of thinking that must be going through most anarchists' heads. They somehow believe that if you take a queen off the table, no more pawns can turn into queens in time. You are out of your mind, replied the comrade. Remember, violence is not our method. We have a specific goal and a plan. We will stick to it, then everything will work out. Okay, the young man waved his hand. You're smarter than that. I was sure we'd get caught, but then at least we'd be on the evening edition of Today. That's not so bad. Silly, Griff grinned. All you want to do is get on the news. Remember, you have to be bold but quiet. And in your vanity, don't forget your comrades. Remember how many people are behind us and how much they want us to win. Everything went easily and quickly as if by notes. The White House beckoned Griff the way a beggar is attracted to a luxurious mansion. He liked to observe this magnificent building, at least from afar, and he had long ago noticed that on the lawn, where the president likes to speak, there is a small passage between the parts of the fence. A man could never fit through it, but a dog could. The same mutt that two-faced Bang always drags around with him. Now it was just a matter of time. While Griff, distracted the lazy cop, Jack baited the dog with a brownie. These Pekingese are voracious as hell. Grabbing the most popular dog in the U.S., the young man shoved him under the bike and carried him to the car they rented on fake ID. You know what I'm thinking? Riff asked, smiling. I mean, they didn't even miss him. They didn't even remember the dog. We're listening to the radio, and nobody even interrupts. Probably won't even come to their senses until we send the message. They won't wake up. Uh-huh, Jack nodded. They don't care about the workers or the animals. They don't care about the environment. And the children. And those poor mothers who have to work instead of spending time with their daughters and sons. It's okay, we'll change the world. It's only a matter of time. When Jack was 10 years old, he first learned that robots could take over all the physical labor in the world. And that the day was not far off when human labor would no longer be necessary. You can just get everything you need for free. A plasma, a set-top box, a phone, coupons for meals at cafes. And in your free time, you can do your favorite things. Play the console, play ball, barbecue, sit at your favorite fast food restaurant. That each person will get his own house with a large backyard, attic, and gazebo. You can sleep as much as you want. Do not run early in the morning to school or the office. It's beautiful. I'm not going to study, Jack declared to his parents, digesting these thoughts in his head. What's the point? I'll study to be a doctor, and 10 years from now there will be a robot doctor. Smarter than me, actually. Ma, you've seen how these irons stitched together are cut great, right? I'll never be able to do that. I'll wait. Pretty soon it'll be free. You'll see. But that's not what happened. Robots have already displaced humans, taking away all sorts of jobs from picking potatoes on the farm to assembling cars. But it was the industrialists and the rich who profited. The average person who wasn't ready to sit around at university had no choice but to get a job at Uber or deliver food. That's how Jack came to hate industrialists. He believed that they were responsible for the fact that most of the world is sitting in poverty, instead of getting free cottages with backyards, plasma, and console. And the only way to bring these underdogs down is through labor unions. And while Biden thinks they'll cut off the oxygen of labor with his new law, he's wrong, and he'll pay dearly for it. Mr. Biden was known for his calm. When he heard the news that his pet was missing, he didn't even change his face. Patrick, the president's closest aide and one of his closest employees, was surprised at his chief's indifference. In fact, Binda's soul was aflame. And his hands, which immediately clenched into fists to the point of pain, the man hid behind his jacket. A few hours later, Patrick returned to the Oval Office with a detailed report. Who was the last person to see Wokey? The president asked in a perfectly calm voice. Shauna, the aide shrugged. That body-positive woman from public relations. Claimed she offered him some nuggets, but our boy refused. He doesn't like spicy food. What time was this? Mr. Biden continued his questioning. No later than 11 o'clock, Patrick replied, and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon I missed the dog. The president stood up and walked around his Oval Office. Yes, this room had known more serious causes for concern, but for some reason, Mr. Binda's missing dog had hit him hard. He probably would have been less surprised to learn that a North Korean missile had reached the coast of the United States. I'll bet he was kidnapped, said the president. But by who? Who could have gotten in the way of this little rascal? Those soulless devils, such scoundrels, have nothing sacred. We must be there to help the weak. The voice of the man in authority trembled. At that moment, Patrick realized that Mr. Biden was much more deeply affected by the loss of his dog than he might at first appear. It was understandable. Wacky, everyone's favorite, was an extremely charming dog. He didn't have a single envious or unkind person in his life, except for the head cat of the White House, but that one was beyond suspicion. Maybe we should make an official statement, an aide whispered. No. The president shook his head. We need to make sure that Wokey really has been kidnapped. Get me Big Paul for a report. Quickly. Stump our minds to go through all the cameras. I need to know exactly who last saw him. And where. Copy that, shouted the assistant and rushed out the door. He only calmed down when he was given a challenge. The harder the better. It was already 8 o'clock in the evening, and still no news of Wokey's fate. Truly, the little dog moved about the White House as he pleased, and tracking her movements through the cameras proved to be no easy task. The Pekingese would not fit into some of the lenses because of its size. A minute later, Big Paul walked into the office. His nickname would have been Giant. The huge African-American, if necessary, could cover not one, but 3 recent U.S. presidents with his mighty back. The chief of security was famous not only for his physical strength, but also for his great intelligence. It was enough to create an illusion of his own indispensability in the most powerful man on earth. "Mr. President," said the chief of security as he saluted and stepped into the office. Mr. Bind physically felt the rush of air that shook the big man's jacket. "Every effort is being made to find your little associate. We're working closely with the FBI and the CIA. I swear to God, we'll find this doggy wherever he is. And if a single hair on his back." "Easy," the president waved his hand. "Kidnapping hasn't been proven yet. What do we know so far?" "We'd have mapped the movements of the Pekingese," said Big Paul with a serious face, and showed the tablet. The red line running through the schematic map of the building perfectly illustrated Brownian motion. There was no logic to the dog's movements. What were they wasting their time on? "Maybe he was wandering somewhere on the adjacent property," Mr. Bind said. "Or maybe he was accidentally picked up by some kind-hearted citizens." "Wokie's image was uploaded to Sari by our recognition program," Big Paul reported. "The doggy didn't show up on any cameras outside the White House." "Still, that doesn't mean he hasn't escaped," the president exhaled. "I want you to sweep the entire area. Think of something." While the security chief was digesting the information, the selector beeped. Patrick finally remembered to make a phone call before reporting. He'd come in twice without knocking. Had the doggy been discovered? That would be damn good news, thought the leader of the states, pressing the button. "Mr. President," an aide shouted in a broken voice. "Mr. President, they sent it. Those bastards sent." "Okay, calm down and say it slowly," Mr. Bind demanded. "What did they send?" What Patrick said made the president feel a sharp pain and resentment again. But there was relief along with it, a kind of ghostly hope. The unfortunate dog, struck by an inattentive driver, was quickly moved into the cabin. The vet took only a quick glance at the little guy and immediately realized that he needed immediate help. It was possible to try to provide it right here on the road, but the only thing in the car, as it turned out, was a human first aid kit, and he needs tools and medicine for animals. All that's at home, as well as the conditions to call for help. We have to hurry. "What's wrong with him?" Ava asked, looking at the dog with a mixture of fear and pity. "It looks like subporous," the vet replied, trying to look at the dog's pupils, "but a Pekingese's eyes are wide enough to make no sense. Come on, let's go. There's no time to lose." He started the engine and handed the carcass with the sticky fur to his partner. She looked at the poor animal with disgust, but she got over herself and accepted the dog. She even cuddled him to her and began to nuzzle him. "Probably forgot to take it home with him," Nason said, pressing the gas pedal. "These Pekingese aren't smart enough. Pet advocates will forgive me. It's a breed trait. They can forget where they live. Well, it's hard for them to remember where they live, especially in apartment buildings. By the way, there are no such in our village." "That's the trouble," cried Ava, cradling the little creature. Who could have done such a thing to this adorable little thing? She wrapped it in the towel she took with her to the fitness club. A slim figure was extremely important to a woman. She was afraid that if she got fat, Mason would stop paying attention to her altogether. "Listen, is your heart beating?" the vet asked, looking at the road. "We'll be home in a couple minutes." Ava concentrated. Through the cloth of the towel, she could feel the dog breathing. It was like he was snoring, but quietly. "I can't hear his heart, but I can feel his breathing," she replied. "I think he's alive." "What are you gonna do?" "We should check him out," the man said, parking in front of the house. "I could take him to work, but it's 30 miles away. We'll treat him right here in our house. So no more soap operas. I'm sorry, darling." Together they rented a small house in the Washington suburbs, and they paid rent equally, as Ava insisted. Although her income was very modest, she was an intern at a law firm and was going to make a career as a lawyer. Mason, though well off, spent a good half of his income on animals. He was obsessed with his little brothers. "Follow me," the vet demanded, striding quickly to the door. As he walked, he took out a key and opened the lock. Their house was very modest: one bedroom, a living room, kitchen, and a tiny hallway with a bathroom. And a small garage, nothing without it. Mason quickly cleared the table of whatever was in his way and spread out a clean sheet. The same linen set Ava had given him for their anniversary. At this point, though, she was willing to forgive her partner's inattention. "Get some water in the basin," the vet demanded, putting the dog down, "and find a rag of some kind." The woman rushed to comply. Mason himself was preparing an IV and a surgical instrument. He quickly found the wound of the dog's right leg. The cut, however, was small. There was no point in suturing it. He thoroughly cleaned the wound and then the whole dog. Pekingese have long hair, which made it difficult to see. The vet checked his pulse, put a thermometer in, barely found a vein to insert a catheter, put it in an IV. A Pekingese, Mason stretched out, trying to take up the silence. A mestizo, I'd say. Not exactly breed standardized. I think he's cute, the woman said. I don't care what the standards are. The doggy still wouldn't regain consciousness. The car must not have hit him, just hit him with a bumper or a wheel. Maybe the driver was trying to avoid a hit and run. That's why the doggy went into a deep sleep. We can't rule out head trauma, the vet said. Must be a concussion. He's completely unresponsive to external stimuli. Some dogs sleep like the dead, though. Will he live? Eva asked in a frightened voice. She thought it would be a terrible shock for her to see a sweet dog die. After something like that, she'd have to go to a counselor for years to heal the trauma. I guess so, Mason answered her, taking off his rubber gloves. If he makes it through the morning, I'll take him to X-ray right away. We need to check all the bones. Run some tests. I think we should show him to Frank. He's a specialist in these little things. Let's go to bed soon, honey, she asked, putting her arm around the man's shoulders. This adventure has worn me out so much. No, he said. The patient is unstable. I must stay with him and stay here all night. Go to bed without me, dear. Even though Mason was a very disciplined doctor, he still fell asleep with his hands in hand on the table. And when the sun woke him up at 6 in the morning, the appearance of the Pekingese veterinarian was quite surprising and even puzzled him. Big Paul stepped aside, letting Patrick pass. There was literally no face on him. In his hand he held a clear baggie, and inside it, "So," said Mr. Bind, looking at his assistant, "what's the news?" Although the president was not young, he had a peculiar aura of authority about him. In his presence, people became timid and ingratiating. It's hard to tell if it was just because of the gentleman's position or something else. Mr. Binda's smile bribed and reassured. Housewives who spend a good half of their day watching TV and social media were willing to give him far more than their own vote. Kidnapped, the aide exhaled. Stolen. What makes you so sure they have Walkie? The imperious man asked. It wasn't hard to guess, the aide replied, wiping away tears. He placed a clear bag on the table in front of his boss. Inside was a red collar with a chip. The man examined the message carefully. There could be no mistake. Those soulless bastards had removed everything that would help identify Wokey. Except for one little trinket, however. So we're dealing with a kidnapping, Mr. Bynes said calmly. Yeah, that was a tough scenario to calculate. You know, you can prepare for any kind of sneak attack, but even that's too much. You were right to put all this stuff in a clear bag. You didn't touch it. No, the assistant nodded. Only with gloves. Looking at the determined leader, Patrick calmed down too. He wiped his tears and felt ashamed that he had let his feelings out. However, the president appreciated him for his sincerity. He needed just such an employee. Intelligent, but direct. You can't overlook the calculation, Patrick said. I've scrutinized the code. All they can be charged with is animal cruelty, and that's if they don't feed and walk it. Technically, a dog is considered property, but we're not talking. What a cute dog, Jack marveled, playing with Wacky. Look, he brings the balloon too. With these words, the anarchist threw the rugger toy to the farthest end of the room. Wagging his tail, the Pekingese dashed after the ball. He grabbed the ball and galloped to his captor, which caused him genuine delight. What a sweet dog. Riff mocked him. I'm going to cry. Let's make a video with him. And circulate it on social media. That's a great idea, Jack said excitedly. Is it okay that we kidnapped him? That's what I'm telling you, asshole, Riff said and slapped his partner in the face. What are we, bloggers or students? We're working class. We have a goal. And we've identified the means available to achieve it. But Waki's so cute, Jack argued, rubbing the back of his head. He's so cool. Does our class struggle concern dogs too? It touches everything, Riff replied calmly. Don't get used to him. A dog is just a thing. The bigwigs have even made nature work for them. Do you know how many hundreds of bucks a distant ancestor of a wolf like this is worth? I'm telling you, don't get attached to that colt on legs. Because if that stubborn old man refuses to do what we want, Griff made a meaningful gesture, showing how the noose tightened around his neck, and pointed his finger at Wokey. He hesitated and sat on his hind legs. It looked as if he had understood his captor's words perfectly. "All right," Jack nodded. "Here's what I'm thinking. Maybe we should contact the press. Tell them what we've done." "Dumbass," Griff shouted. "We don't want cheap publicity. We have a goal in mind, you know. If the old devil repeals union reform, we'll give him the dog. And if he doesn't, we gotta go all the way." "See, I've been thinking," Jack went on. "Usually kidnappers somehow keep in touch with the people they're trying to influence. It's like that in all the movies and some of the games. And we just kind of threw out the demands and that's it. What if they have questions?" Griff thought for a moment. His uneducated comrade's words had some common sense, but contacting the White House was too risky. They must be searching for that little Pekingese. They'll trace the call with ease. "Let's read up on our action," Griff suggested. He opened Google, typed Wokey into the search box and began to study. Nothing. There wasn't even any news about his disappearance. But as it turns out, the Pekingese leads a busy life. Accompanied his master in his trips to Europe, the Middle East, and even Australia, Griff felt a sharp envy. He had never even traveled outside the United States in his life. He'd never even been to the sea or the mountains. And here's some hulking mockery of nature who's traveled halfway around the world, just because his master is the President of America. How unfair the world is. "Victory!" shouted Jack. "Buddy, we won." The boy ran up to his comrade, hugged him, and began to jump. Wokey, too, stood on his hind legs and turned around several times as if to share the cheers. Griff stared at his mate for a while, disbelieving his optimism. Then he took his cell phone from his hands and began to read the news that caused such a wave of enthusiasm in the young man. "Victory?" He was indignant. "You call this a victory?" "Yes," he nodded. "They suspended the reform. Exactly what you and I wanted. Now we have to get the dog back." "Suspended, not canceled." Griff shouted. "We have to go all the way." Jack scratched his head and sat down. He scrutinized the news again, racking his brain. It did indeed say that the reform was suspended pending consultations with the expanded Council of Trade Unions, the very one in whose interests all this fuss had been started. "Right," Jack whispered. "Those bastards, they almost had me fooled." "What am I telling you?" said the Griff, a frightful smile on his face. "They're like hustlers, they'll get you around. You stick with me, you won't lose." The anarchist already had a new plan of action in his head, and what he was going to do would not please anyone, not even young Jack, his faithful friend and comrade. It had been a full day since Wacky had gone missing. Mr. Bind had canceled all meetings and events to focus on finding his pet. Journalists competed in speculation as to what could have caused this behavior. There were various versions, from unknown illness of the president to banal fatigue. Patrick entered the office. His red eyes showed that he had slept for a couple of hours during the night. "Good morning, Chief," he said. "Alas, no results. What we can say with certainty is that they were well-trained men. Maybe they were trained in China or Iran." "Have our experts studied the message?" Mr. Bind asked. "And the manifesto?" "They have," Patrick nodded. "Nothing. No skin cells, no fingerprints. Nothing. Delivered from the post office by quadricopter. We made a request to the operator's company for nothing. Professionals," Mr. Bind said as if you were praising the kidnappers. "Calculated everything down to the last detail. And after my tactical move, there were attempts to contact us. Nothing." Mr. Bind waved his hands. "They are waiting in silent. We have no contact with the kidnappers." Mr. Bind felt guilt again, as he had with Roy years ago. Maybe Wokey's not alive anymore, and he didn't even spend his last hours with him, didn't give him a bowl of water, didn't pat his ears. It's a shame to lose a friend, especially when they're taken away by scoundrels just because you're president. "I don't want publicity," the president said. "If the press asks questions, deny everything. Pretend it's not happening." "But Mr. Bind," the aide began to argue. "What if the voters think the president's a liar? According to public opinion polls, Wokey is the most recognizable member of the Oval Office, more popular than my vice president, Bind squinted, than the Secretary of State." "Yes," said the aide. "Wokey's rating is a good dozen points higher. Let's be objective. Your whole office is a shabby mess. In the 3 years we've been working in Washington, everyone's got skeletons, the vice president and the Secretary of State. Hell, even you." "Go on," Mr. Bind nodded. He valued his assistant not only for his loyalty, but also for his ability to take the bitter truth for granted. A dog is a different matter, Mr. Bond said. It is impossible not to love her. According to recent polls, only ardent cat people have a negative attitude toward Wokey, and not all of them. I'm afraid the disappearance of your doggy could seriously hurt ratings and also make citizens feel insecure. Remember why Trump lost? When there was a pandemic raging around the world, he pretended it wasn't happening. I can understand that, sighed Mr. Bind. But the people wanted safety, the aide exclaimed. They wanted vaccines and all that. That's why you didn't win the second round. I think the older comrade waved his hand in the direction of the coffee table. Jack looked at it in bewilderment. There was a tourniquet, hydrogen peroxide and bandages, and a garden pruner on the tabletop. How had he missed all that equipment? The boy looked at his mentor. What the hell is this? He asked. It's simple, Riff shrugged. Those rascals don't want to fulfill our demands. Heck, they even almost had you fooled. What are we going to do? Jack wondered. Every day they cut off a piece of your future, the older comrade instructed. Little by little, so that you don't feel a thing. It's time for you to do the same. I didn't get it, the young man admitted frankly. He wasn't very good with metaphors. We'll bite off his paw. Riff replied, we'll send it to the president of the rich in a box, and let him try not to cancel union reform. The young man stood as if struck by thunder. His face was suddenly pale, as if it had been discolored. You're not serious now, are you? Jack asked with a silly smile, because I've never personally cut off a dog's legs. Relax, buddy, the older man said. It's just an animal, it's not smart. It's not human. You have to tie a tourniquet, squeeze the secateurs and that's it. Then peroxide it. He's got 4 legs, he's got a lot to spare. Jack turned even paler. He pictured the scene and he felt sick. He felt dizzy and sat down on a chair to keep from falling to the floor. Wokey woke up and lifted his muzzle, watching his captors. This is an important part of the party struggle, Griff persuaded his sidekick. Our ancestors blowed for the leftist cause, and you can't even cut off a dog's paw. You're weak. I don't think you're ready for the decisive struggle that the working class expects from us. Jack remained silent. There were heavy thoughts in his head. When they first started this business, he had no idea how far it would go. By the way, I've been talking to someone, Griff continued, and they promised me a good position in the union, the kind of position where you need your own assistant. And hell, I know just who I can give the job to. What, you're going to work for free again? Jack asked with no enthusiasm. No, we'll get you the proper paperwork, said his partner. You'll get bit salary and take your revolutionary struggle to the next level. You can finally finish college, take some courses where they'll teach you how to speak properly. That's all it takes. Riff made a gesture as if he were cutting paper with his fingers and was gone. Jack was left alone with Wacky. He was fully awake and looking good-naturedly at his captor. He seemed to be smiling, as he always did. The young man thought that his older friend was right about something. After all, it was only a dog. Aren't there many of them running around on the streets? On the other hand, he had already spent a few days of his life with this little guy. Oh, brother, what are we going to do with you? Jack sighed and looked over the young animal breeder's kit. First, he had to know where to apply the tourniquet. Second, somehow immobilize the dog. The very idea of stripping a living creature of its limbs seemed inhuman to him. Of course, he could do something like that to people he thought were scoundrels. All those bankers, financiers, politicians, and other investors. But this was a dog, a defenseless little dog, one he'd grown to like over the past few days. Jack thought that before he lost his paw, Wokey needed a good walk. Enjoy life. He even wanted to ride his bike to the store and buy him something nice. But there wasn't much money left, so he couldn't fulfill that noble impulse. Don't be afraid of anything, said the young man. Until the Griff comes back, I won't do anything. I'll make him buy some painkillers. In the meantime, we'll play. Just as they were planning their action, Griff and Jack fenced off a small area behind the house with netting. A prisoner needs a walk. He's a dog, not a person. The Pekingese felt perfectly well in this modest cubbyhole and did not even show that the captivity was weighing him down. The dog brought a ball and put it in front of Jack. Do you want to play soccer? The kidnapper asked, tossing the toy. Come on, let's play. He tossed the ball to Wacky and he brought it back. Even on his short legs, the dog covered the distance of the yard in just a few seconds. He knew neither fatigue nor doubt. His long fur fluttered as he raced toward his goal. Once again fetching the ball, Wokey carelessly spit it out. The toy rolled under the porch. "Oh shit," said Jack. "You're clumsy, buddy." "All right, brother, don't worry, I'll get it. It's a piece of cake." For several minutes, the young anarchist tried to retrieve the ball from under the porch. He could see it through the gap, but the toy had rolled too far away for him to reach it by hand. Eventually, Jack guessed to grab a stick to push the ball toward him. It was a good 10 minutes before he managed it. Sweat beaded on his forehead from the exertion. "He did it," shouted the young man, tossing the ball in his hand. "Catch it, Wacky, Wacky? Hey, buddy, where are you?" Jack looked around, but the dog was nowhere to be found. He thought the dog had gone back to the house. The door was open. He went into the living room and called out to Wacky. No sign of him. He looked under the couch, behind the curtain, in the bathroom, even in the closet. No one. He whistled, clapped his hands, smacked his lips. The baby didn't respond to his calls. Where could he have run off to? Said the young anarchist in fear, running around the house. "Come back, Wacky. We'll touch your paw. I swear it." But the dog did not respond. Then Jack decided to watch the doggy outside. The lot was very small, with no bushes or buildings of any kind. Could it have gotten under the fence? The boy rushed to the netting they had stretched along the fence. As Jack examined it, he saw something that made him fearful. Big Paul immediately dismissed the feminist theory. Yes, two of them had been hanging around near where Mr. President's dog had disappeared. They rode up to the White House on electric scooters. "Don't talk about things you don't understand, Mr. Burnside. Just do your job. Leave the political nuts and bolts to me, okay? We're gonna lift everybody up," Big Paul said with inspiration. "The whole city, the whole state, the whole country, the whole world if we have to." "No," the president interrupted him. "I don't approve. Keep it subtle. No one must know that Wacky has been kidnapped." As the African American left the office, a message came in. The scored messenger was considered the safest and most secure. After reading the message from a man even more secretive than scored, the president felt some relief and a sense of hope. Standing in front of the fence, Jack scratched his head in confusion. Had the little man circled him? Obviously, the prisoner had escaped, and had done so in the most audacious manner possible. The plastic netting that was supposed to keep the doggy out had been chewed through, as neatly as if Wokey had a pattern with him. Exactly where the distance between the fence and the ground was maximized, and how much does the Pekingese need to crawl? Swinging over the fence, Jack darted down the street. He ran first one way, then the other. To the left and right, identical houses, identical cars. Only now he noticed that the whole village consisted of identical cottages, similar to each other, like twins. Jack walked back to the house Griff had rented and tried to control the trouble that had come over him. Bent to the ground to look for signs of the doggy, but the last week had been eerily dry. No paw prints. Looked around for cameras. No, Griff had deliberately chosen a township without video surveillance. He hated being watched. "Calm down, Jack," the young man urged himself. "It's just a Pekingese, a decorative breed with the brains of a goldfish. How far did he get on his crooked legs?" Jack decided to do a methodical sweep of the entire village. If he had an analytical mind, he would have realized that such a task would be difficult to accomplish alone. There were 400 identical economy class houses in this suburb. They are spread over 20 streets, straight as a string. If it weren't for the huge signs with numbers, it would be easy to get lost. Jack got on his bike and began to cut circles. He called out to the little dog and held a ball in his hand to get his attention. But the young anarchist remembered whose doggy they had kidnapped, so from the outside the search looked strange. He just whispered the name, Wacky, Wacky, and squeaked the ball. "Get out of here," some old lady yelled. "I've got grandkids next door." "It's all right, ma'am," Jack replied. "I'm just looking for my little friend. He escaped through the netting, you know." "I'll call the police now," the woman continued. "People like you should be isolated." The young man wanted to say something offensive, but he bit his tongue. What if the old hag really did call the cops? Then he'd be in trouble. On the way back, he suddenly had a new problem. He'd completely forgotten where Griff lived. He'd forgotten the street and cottage number out of excitement. "I'd better really cut that traitor's foot off," shouted the anarchist. Now a man in his 40s looked at him suspiciously, looking like a Latino. He stopped Jack, in the manner of a horseman trying to rein a wild horse. The anarchist had no choice but to slow down. "Who do you think you're going to cut the foot of?" the Latino asked in a husky voice. "Did Pedro send you to scare me?" "No, senor," replied the anarchist. "It is I who ride and sing the song. You better cut off the traitor's foot." "What are you saying?" The man wouldn't stop. "Pedro sent you. Answer me." "I have no idea who Pedro is," Jack sighed. "Let me go, please." "All right, get out of here," the Latino hissed. "But if you ever show up on 9th Street again, you're on your own." 9th. That's the same street where Griff lives. Thank God I found the house. Jack circled the lot once more, calling loudly for Wacky. The answer was silence. He resented the behavior of the locals. He had a tragedy, and they're pestering him with some incompetence. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a weekday. Doesn't anyone go to work at all? We need to take another good look around, the guy thought. That douchebag Griff's gonna skin me. He's gonna send my paw to the president. Shit, I'm gonna get myself into this mess. When Griff parked his car near the cottage, he immediately had a feeling that something was wrong. First, the gate was wide open. Secondly, the doors to the cottage were also wide open. Thirdly, neither the dog nor his accomplice was anywhere to be seen. "Wookie!" Griff heard a shriek. "Wacky, get out!" Strengthened in his suspicions, the man rushed into the house. There he saw only a confused boy. In his hand he clutched a ball and squeaked at it. The young man looked away and pretended to be looking intently for something. "Where is our prisoner?" Griff asked. "You're gonna curse, boss," Jack replied. "You're gonna cuss. I tried to do your bidding, and he broke free and ran away." "What?" the older man whispered. "Ran away? Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I did?" Jack was outraged. "If you hadn't been out there and left me alone with that dog, none of this would have happened." The men began to swear and shout at each other. In the heat of their quarrel, they went out into the street, where they continued the debate with renewed vigor. "You young people don't understand a damn thing about revolutionary struggle," shouted Griff. "All you want is chips, beer, and consoles. Our ancestors shed blood, and you—" "What?" Jack argued. "You think you were the one who spilled blood. You didn't even want to get your hands dirty and run away. I'll give you a—" With these words, the young man clenched his fist and raised his hand high. Fighting was not in the plans of Griff. In addition, he was not sure that he could cope with this young laggard. "All right, calm down," said the older man. "Truce. 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The sun is still high. We must act. Now." Watching from his hiding place the pathetic efforts to find him, Wookie seemed to smile. Most likely the dog was just opening his mouth to take a deep breath. But who knows what goes on in a little doggy's head? The intern's lot wasn't easy. At the law firm where she worked, they were always trying to put all the hard work on her. So she stayed late tonight. She had a hard time getting to Mason's house, first by train, then by bus. She walked another 20 minutes. It was almost 12 o'clock when she opened the door. "Good evening," her man said. He was sitting on the couch with the rescued dog. "Is he feeling better?" Ava asked. She was as worried about the little one as she was about her own brother. "A miraculous healing," smiled Mason. "He just got into good hands in time. You know, it's so awful when you can't save a patient." "Oh, Mason, Ava sighed. "You should have kids right now. I wish you put your energy in the right place." But the vet didn't hear those words again because he was scrutinizing Wookie's belly. The doggy was recovering quickly. Already on the second day he had an appetite, and on the third day he began to cut circles around the house. One thing was bad. Now Ava was jealous of the charming Pekingese. "You won't even ask me how I'm doing," she said. "And why don't I come home until 12? "It's pretty obvious," Mason smiled. "You're a workaholic." "Maybe I have a lover," Ava asked. "A big African-American guy?" "Don't be ridiculous," the vet said. "I know that you would never trade your career for some miserable pleasures." The man's words somehow cheered up the aspiring lawyer. She was really messing with a truth-teller. Luckily, Mason guessed to order a pizza, which was in a box in the kitchen. Ava heated up a slice, ate it with a Coke, and felt a little better. "Honey," she said, trying to come at it from the other side. "Yes, I stay at work sometimes, but have you ever seen me carry my papers in here?" "Sorry, honey, I don't pay attention to that sort of thing at all," the vet shrugged. "I'm not likely to notice any papers. Besides, don't forget it's not safe to keep them here now. We got Pet." That was too much. Ava wasn't about to share her man with some dog. Besides, no pets in a house with children. And this is the result of the theme of children he does not want to develop, but animals want. However, as a true lawyer, Ava was not going to attack head-on. She needed a clever maneuver, thanks to which she could get her way. Strange, the woman said. I started my relationship with a law-abiding man. Now I'm with a real criminal. Such a nice dog, said the vet. I'll keep him. No way, Ava exhaled. He has an owner. We have to find him. Find the owner? Mason asked. Is that what you call the man who abandoned this beautiful baby to his fate? No, I can't part with this creature anymore. Look how he smiles. Honey, Ava said, first of all, it's illegal to take someone else's property. Secondly, just think what's going through the mind of the real owner of this ball of fur. He must be worried sick. Nonsense, the vet said. I dropped the picture off to our guys. They looked through all the missing pet ads. There's nothing like it. By the way, they're only looking for 3 Pekingese, but 2 of them are females, so ours is out right away. Okay, thought Ava, but in her head she already had a plan to solve the problem, quickly and efficiently. It had been several days since unknown criminals had stolen Woki. Fortunately, the press hadn't noticed the baby's disappearance yet. Mr. Bine caught himself thinking that he was able to get over the loss of his Pekingese, and although the pain of the loss grated on his heart, he was able to coexist with it. I have a report, the aide said, contacting the president. When will you be in? The unexpectedly cheerful voice gave Mr. Binder hope. He told him to come in at once. A couple minutes later, a cheerful Patrick appeared at the door. The assistant was hiding something under a towel, something small. Had his luck just run out? Here, look, Mr. President. Patrick smiled, removing the towel. He was holding a Pekingese in his arms. Found it? Mr. Bind explained. He couldn't hide his joy. My boy, come here. Not you, Patrick. Give me that furry little bugger. The president accepted the burden and brought Wacky to him. Hugged him, rubbed his belly, but the dog didn't respond to the caresses. In fact, he tried to pull away. He even whimpered a little. That's not Wacky, said the president, returning the animal to the aide. No, Patrick agreed. It's Toki. I figure if we can't get a double, we might as well pick a successor. Look, they look like 2 peas in a pod. Mr. Bind sighed. Yes, it's politics. All you have to worry about is ratings. But somehow he was not impressed by this approach. Maybe a successor was a good thing for the voter, but you still shouldn't have hurt him like that. What's the plan? The president asked. A press conference in 15 minutes, Patrick replied. Here, I prepared the talking points. He held out a small folder of papers. Binda's memory was fading, and without a cheat sheet, he felt uncomfortable in front of the press. However, having spent more than 30 years in politics, he had learned to say meaningless talking points that would fit any issue. Good afternoon, said the president, raising his hand in greeting. We have gathered for a small briefing. Mr. Bind, shouted a pretty girl with bright red hair. How long are we going to tolerate the overpopulation of Chinese goods in our retail network? Thank you for your question, replied the president. As you know, fighting inflation is our priority. Therefore, we simply have to look for goods that would have a competitive price, and we can't close the market to them. What should our American producers do? The red-haired girl was indignant. Compete, Mr. Bind answered briefly, which drew a small round of applause. Everything went on from there. The moderator would point to a member of the media, and he would ask the question. We went through the Middle East, gun ban, juvenile delinquency, and other topics in which Mr. Bind was a real ace. But suddenly the familiar pattern faltered. Mr. President, one of the reporters called out, ignoring the moderator. The pool colleague who was supposed to ask the question was simply pushed back by his mighty back. May I ask a question for the stuffy news? Go ahead, nodded the president, though he didn't like the disrupted order. There are reports in the media that Woki has been captured, the reporter said. How can you comment on this news? Then let's go together, said the big man. Every dog here knows me. Do dogs run away too? Jack asked, as if inadvertently. Yes, the man nodded and put his big paw on Jack's back. The last time was a week ago. We found him in no time. Thanks for your help, mister. But I can handle it, the anarchist said. No need to worry. I won't take no help from you, the man said. I have a lot of experience, if anything. Okay, there's not a minute to lose. In the meantime, the Griff was making his tour of the settlement. Alas, a brilliantly executed operation had ended in total failure. Waki was gone for good this time. There's no way he's gonna get any attention now. It looked like a great idea. There's no liability for kidnapping animals for political purposes. It's not stealing. No one would have to be killed. However, he still had one more idea. Even if this dog escaped, he, Griff, could make a lot of money. But you have to act fast, before someone found the dog and returned it to its owner. In the morning, while Ava and Mason were getting ready for work, Wookie was always running around. The girl couldn't figure out what was bothering her. Sure enough, she'd seen that animal somewhere before. I think it was in her ribbon, except that Pekingese had a red collar. Listen, Ava asked, does that little dog remind you of anyone? Mason could list a dozen of his patients from memory who looked the same, give or take. Young male, up to 4 years old, you can tell by the teeth. Healthy and inspected. Fortunately, the injury was not serious. He's finally recovered. We'll have to keep an eye on the dog though, see if he has other injuries he didn't notice. He reminds me of a dog that's been hurt by careless people. Mason sighed. What was the owner thinking? No collar, no chip. Nothing at all. What are we going to do? Ava asked. We keep it, the vet shrugged. Of course, I like bigger breeds, but Pekingese have their own charm. You know, they're so small and desperate warriors. If he likes us, he'll stand up for us. And he started giving his girlfriend a whole lecture on what a Pekingese is. That the breed had been bred centuries ago in China, that the little dogs were intelligent and loyal. At times like this, the woman usually had something on her mind. Mason was impossible to stop. You know what? Suddenly she asked. I think he's just cute. Look at him smile. But that's no reason to break the law. They looked at the Pekingese. He was really very handsome and charming. Looking at his rescuers, the dog opened his mouth a little. If you wanted, it could be taken for a smile. The vet brightened up and rubbed his patient on the scruff of the neck. He figured a dog like that would definitely want to play ball, or even frisbee. Their mornings getting ready for work were the most enjoyable time spent together. Mason could make breakfast, or Ava could make sandwiches. Then they have coffee together while they drove the car. Today was the first day since the Pekingese had been found that the vet had decided to leave him at home rather than bring him to work. In principle, they tolerate loneliness well, the man said as he drove the car. It's okay, I'll walk him tonight. Do you want me to tell you what he looks like? Ava smiled slyly. Mason nodded, and his partner's answer puzzled the experienced veterinarian. It even sent him into a mild shock. Arriving at the office, the girl immediately logged onto Facebook. She took a close look at Binda's page, and then did something that made her heart sink. Even though Mason wouldn't have approved of it, Ava took a few pictures and sent them to the president's account, stating that the Pekingese had been found in the Washington, D.C. suburbs without being overly precise in the description. Within 10 minutes, she received the message, and she couldn't believe what she read. When Mason returned from work that evening, he found neither the dog nor his woman. It seems Ava had packed in a hurry because everything had been turned over in places. Although the daring action had ended in failure, Griff was not sad. Now he had money and also motivation to hack further. Soon, very soon, he would take his rightful place among the elite. That's what they're really like. Stupid, clumsy, lazy. The suspension of union reform is over. A sure sign that the dog has been found. Let's just say he made his money, except his young accomplice has disappeared. He's probably upset about his failure. Well, let him suffer. This kid will still be useful to him, so do not lose touch with him. Maybe they can do something cooler in the future. Keep him close. We should get a couple or 3 more of these performers who aren't burdened with too much intelligence. Where have you been? Griff asked, watching Jack enter the house. I've been looking for a black cat named Waki, with a huge black guy, who also almost beat me up when we first met. So, Griff yawned. Did you find him? Yeah, Jack answered. I had a hard time convincing them the cat wasn't mine. Those animal advocates wouldn't believe me. They drove me around the state all night. I can't remember it. You know, Jack, you may have failed, Griff said, but we can still continue our work, cooperating for the common goal of protecting workers' rights. Like hell we can, he replied, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a can of beer. He opened it and took a sip with pleasure. Griff jumped on the spot in surprise. Why was the kid so upset with him? So what if you went for a ride with the animal protectors? It was an adventure. Besides, it's his own fault. Did you think I wouldn't figure it out? Jack asked irritably, pointing at his cell phone. Do you take me for an idiot? Griff looked at the screen. Escaped or stolen? Read the headline. Below it were pictures of the president's dog, the same one the news agency had given him a lot of money for. In one of them, he had no trouble identifying his own laminate. Jack must have gotten over it too. Relax, buddy, the ringleader said conciliatingly. All I did was drop them pictures to get some publicity for our action. When I realized the dog had escaped. Where's the rights thing? Jack was indignant. Where is it about workers? Not a word. So they lied to me, Griff shrugged. But it doesn't matter. No, you're the one who cheated. The young man shouted. I'm leaving. My mom said, don't trust leftists. I'm going to her. Where will you go? Griff smiled. You're nothing. You're a total zero. You can't even write. You have to start from scratch. Go back to school, for example. You're just reading my mind, Jack replied angrily. The first thing I'll do is get my diploma. And a profession. I'd had enough of this fight of yours. But he didn't have time to go back to school. A few hours later, Jack was sobbing and testifying at the police station and assured the officers that he'd done nothing wrong. Griff was brought to the station a little later thanks to his intuition. He left the house shortly before the arrival of law enforcement officers. But he didn't get far. Engel was gone for a second day. She hadn't returned his calls and ignored his messages. Mason felt devastated. Ava had been gone for 2 days. She hadn't returned his calls and ignored his messages. Mason felt devastated. Honey, he dictated a message to her. Please, I will take time off work to spend time with you. I will listen to you carefully and never interrupt you. I will never, ever take someone else's. Do you hear me? Call me back? Okay. Kisses. The second cause for concern is the Pekingese. Why did Ava take him? It makes sense, though. She must have found the real owner, gave it back to him, and decided not to do business with him, Mason, anymore. The vet, devastated by his partner's behavior, couldn't do anything. He just sat there staring at the ceiling. The phone brought him out of his reverie. Had she decided to call? The number was unfamiliar. Mr. Mason? It was a thick bass, so low you could drill through a wall. Yes, the man answered. To whom do I have the honor of speaking? I represent the government, the man replied quickly. We'd like to ask you to step out onto the back patio. For a few minutes. Right now. The back patio. The vet was surprised. It's kind of dirty out there. We can see that, answered the caller. And yet, Mason was confused. Had she notified the police as well? Then he'd be in a lot of trouble. He'd have to find a lawyer right away. The vet knew these guys charged a fortune for their clients, although he recently treated a cat that belonged to a lawyer. What was his name? Gathering his strength, Mason headed for the back door. Still, you gotta hand it to the police. They could have come in through the front door and the neighbors would have noticed. There's a small chance of saving face. Hello, said the vet, opening the door, and he couldn't believe his eyes. A real delegation had gathered just outside his house. At the very gate stood a man, a huge African-American man with a good-natured face. This big guy's on TV all the time. What's his name? Just behind him, on his right hand, stood a woman in a strict suit and smiled sternly. And on his right hand was a typical American with a white smile. A little farther away, thoughtful crestfallen man kept a watchful eye on the surroundings. A good dozen cars with government license plates could hardly fit on a small road. One of them carried small American flags. Good evening, Mason said, and wished he'd worn something decent before going out on the back patio. He embarrassed himself by shucking his robe, underneath which was an old t-shirt stained with stains. Greetings, nodded the head of the delegation. I apologize for the lack of notice. It's all a security precaution. No big deal, shrugged the vet. Thank you for stopping by. On behalf of Mr. President, I thank you, said the big man on the TV. What's his name? He held out a chubby hand. Thank you, Mason nodded, returning the handshake. But what is he thanking me for? I voted for a rival in the last election. I even got drunk when buying one. You can come up and ask, the visitor smiled. Only if we accompany you. The three of them approached the black car with the flags. One of the windows rolled down and the vet saw a Pekingese. It was sitting in Mr. Binda's arms. It was wearing the same red collar around its neck. Thank you for your humanity, the president said. You've done a great deal for us. Really, you don't have to thank me, Mason replied calmly. I'm not going to vote Democrat in the election anyway. You have a beautiful woman, Mr. Bine continued, with a big heart. She told how you spared no effort or time in getting Walkie out. We'll be sure to tell that story. The woman? Mason asked. Where is she? Oh, she's being interviewed at one of our offices right now, the president replied. I swore we'd find the best use for her talents. I called, said the vet. Thank you again for doing this. The president interrupted him, waved his hand, and the window closed. The delegation in expensive cars disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. The veterinarian watched them with his mouth open. What was happening reminded him of some cheap humor show. He went back into the house, poured himself a whiskey, and tried to cope with his emotions. It wasn't working. He was brought to his senses by a phone call. Honey, it was Ava. I'm sorry I didn't call you yesterday. I was strongly advised not to. Okay, Mason said. Are you going to be there today? Yes, wait for me as usual, the woman said. And again, I'm sorry about that. By the way, I found a new job. I'm aware of that, the vet replied. The president told me. Big Paul was a little unhappy with himself. By the time he managed to apprehend Jack and Griff, the doggie had already been returned. A chain of coincidences, the kind that's hard to believe. And this chick asks so many questions. She looks good though, very appetizing. Bringing these crooks to justice won't be easy, Big Paul said. We have to be discreet. As the White House representative in this matter, I will exercise the utmost restraint, Ava replied, and discretion. They're denying everything, the chief of security continued, and there are certain difficulties of a purely legal nature. Oh, leave that to us, Mr. Paul, the woman interrupted. I'm sure we can find the right wording. If only we were willing. You're a very interesting girl, Big Paul decided to go on the attack. I'd love to have a drink with you, or two, or get to know you better. You know what I mean. I'm sorry, Mr. Paul, but you're going to have to keep your distance, Ava told him off. I would never trade my job for dubious pleasures. Besides, I have a husband waiting for me at home. Hell no, the security chief grinned. I looked at your profile. You're single. But you weren't looking ahead, were you? Ava smiled. Oh, I have a very caring and loving husband. He adores our children, future children. You know what I mean, don't you?